Are you searching for a deeper understanding of your faith?
Inspiring Philosophy is your go-to resource for exploring the rich tapestry of Christian thought.
From biblical archaeology to philosophy of mind, we dive into the topics that matter.
Our content bridges faith and understanding, offering insights into God's existence and the reliability of the New Testament.
Join a community where faith meets reason and discover the answers you've been seeking.
Inspiring Philosophy, where faith meets understanding. I just want everyone to know the live chat's fault is fans who decided to tell people to start making random animal noises, and now it's just filled with
Bark
them.
with me
So
if you're my puppies.
let's just go back. All right, that's much better. How are you doing today, Joel? This
You
is
have
great.
no power here.
Yeah, doing good.
I gave him too much power. This is a mistake. Yeah, so unfortunate. All right.
What have I got myself into? What have I done?
I don't know. So, welcome everyone. Glad to have you back for this important stream. We're going to be it's going to be a very, very in-depth deep dive into this subject about Joshua's conquest, war, violence in the Bible. Joel and I were talking about this a month or so ago, and he was making some very, very interesting points when we were looking at a response to me. And so I was like, you know, it'd be really good to get you to just talk about a lot of this stuff, because there's a lot of really cool, interesting stuff here that I have been thinking about having read what John Harvey Walton's dissertation on exile, death, these kinds of issues. And like you were talking about some similar things, and I'm like, we should talk about this because you got some really interesting, unique insights into Joshua's conquest and what's going on in Deuteronomy and the Torah in general. And so just decided, let's just do a stream. Let's dive right in. So welcome. Thanks for coming back on the channel.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, excited to be here. Excited to talk about it. It's a tough issue, real tough issue, but needs to be thought about carefully, I think. So yeah, hopefully I can add something to it.
And of course, we cannot have a stream without a super chat bringing up the men of Al-Zut. After the men of Al-Zut had their way with Muhammad, they proclaimed Alhamdulillah. Do you know what that's about, Joel?
No, I don't.
Oh,
know.
Unfortunately, if we have time later, I will read you the story of Muhammad and the men of the Al-Zut. But I'd rather get into this stream today because I would love your initial reaction. So if we have time later, we will do that, since we got a super chat, and that means we have to read it later. But I'd rather get into this whole issue, though. Thank you as well for the other super chat there. So yeah, if you're ready, we can put up your slides, dive in, whatever you want to do first. You can just start going right into it. We'll be covering a lot of stuff about alleged genocide in the Bible with Joshua's conquest, all this stuff. We'll be taking a look at a response to me from like a video I did over a year ago. I don't even know. But yeah, it was a good segue into a lot of the stuff you want to talk about. So that's why we're here.
Yeah. No, and again, I appreciate you inviting me on. We chatted behind the scenes, like you said. So yeah, we are going to respond to response that Kipp Davis did to you, and then we're going to kind of like use springboard off that. But I would like to just kind of like right from the get-go, because people have seen the stream, they've seen the title of the stream. So this is like really hard subject matter. So I myself struggle with it like greatly. I think violence in the Old Testament, it's a hard subject. These warfare texts are hard, I think, for anyone in a 21st century context. So I'm going to say that some of the things we're going to talk about today, these are, in my opinion, the hardest in the Old Testament. There aren't easy answers. We should feel weight, I think, when we're talking about these things. there's a bit of a black stain almost on theological discourse when it comes to these topics. So we got to be kind of careful. And these are pretty like vicious fighting grounds. These topics online, people get really and it makes sense why they get so emotionally attached to this. So I'm going to say, at least from my own perspective from the outset, that you can be a Christian or otherwise and hold different views on violence in the Old Testament. There are takes that are different from typical evangelicalism out there. Devout guys, you can see like Greg Boyd, Pete Enns, even on YouTube here, Randall Rouser. I don't know if do you guys know Randall Rouser?
Yeah.
I know of him. Yeah.
Book.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesus Loves Canaanites.
Yeah.
That one, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like there are well-educated Christians who don't think the divine violence in the Old Testament is representative of the God revealed in Jesus. Like, and I respect those opinions. I understand why they land where they do. If you're someone who, seriously, if you're somebody out there who like belittles deeply thoughtful Christians and scholars like this, that they don't hold your view of the Bible, then I would suggest that you sit longer with these kinds of texts. Use your imagination and try and build some empathy. It's really important. I know I'm doing a lot of preamble right now, but you actually kind of have to do this kind of preamble for this topic. Yeah. And you can be friends with people who don't hold the same views as you. So I have a buddy, Carter. He doesn't share my perspective. He thinks that the violence in the Old Testament, especially the stuff we're going to talk about today, is like representative of ancient Near Eastern kind of tribal mindsets that aren't representative necessarily of God's will. And it's kind of God meeting them and working along with them in that. And kind of like it's only in Jesus that you see God's will. We're great friends, like really great friends. And we totally disagree on this. And that's fine. It's actually fine. Smart people can disagree on things. And you can still be friends with them and be kind to them. So let's just let that be true. Smart people disagree on this particular topic. And there is, Than, I think because you said that you told me in private that this is something that you've really researched or looked into a lot. There's so much freaking literature on this subject.
This is one of Joel, when you and I were talking about this beforehand, I even told you like I have no idea how to even package all of this in a way that's digestible in the first place. Because there's questions upon questions upon questions, and when you have some answers, then you have to answer more questions. And that's one of the other troubles I have with this is people want fast answers. They don't have the attention, like people don't have the attention span to actually like really dig deep and consider some of the really weird stuff that you find in the text itself. And so it's tough. I don't know if you saw this. Well, Joel, we just discovered that we both like anime. So you know the anime Baki, right?
No, I don't
Really?
Maybe I don't know anime as well as you.
Okay, totally fine. It's just a bunch of buff dudes fighting. Okay, typical.
I've seen. I think my wife showed me a clip of it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm just bringing this up because I think this is a good like case example of unpacking some of the intuitions that kind of go into this. So Baki, it's just all it is it's a bunch of buff dudes fighting, right? And there is
most anime.
And out of all of the like 4,000 hours of footage that it has, there's one like 3-minute scene where Baki and his girlfriend are naked and doing the forbidden dance, right? Of all times that my wife could walk downstairs and see what I'm up to, it's them, right? So I bring this up because now my wife's like stuck with this choice. Like, do I just judge what my husband is up to and his character and all this other stuff based off of this one little like moment? Or do I like take into account prior knowledge, like the whole entire context, narrative structure of everything, including even the narrative structure of the show Baki, which by the way, like the sex scene is because he thought he was about to die when he was going to go do a fight. Right. And so like the whole entire point I'm trying to make here is, well, she could have just let the initial shock of the gruesomeness like force her to make a judgment. But instead what she did is she took a step back and took a second to think. And then when I said, it's not what it looks like, she was like, I know. Right. And I think that same like texture kind of applies when we're coming at the war text, right? Like we can look at some of these really gruesome passages, they'll shock us, but then we have to remember to take a step back and look at the narrative structure as a whole. Is that what I'm trying to say makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we're going to be on a similar page then when it comes to this topic. It's definitely one that it's easy to get like emotional and then lost in kind of the sound bites rather than in the macro kind of picture that's being painted, which is what we're, I think, aiming to do today, is to talk a bit about that. Yeah, no, thanks for that. Yeah, my goal, even though we say that, it might even come across to some people as like, oh, hey, you're just trying to justify, or you're just trying to get away from the topic or something. I hope that we're all on the same page. We just want to be honest with the text in front of us, but honest with like a rational, focused approach to the text, like really digging deep into what does this say? How is the story developing? What's going on in these texts? So I'm always trying to do that. That's my goal. I'm not out to try and justify anything in particular. What are these texts doing? I probably should just quickly say that there's a lot of probably political baggage that could come with this particular topic right now. We're talking about texts involving ancient Israel and warfare, and I know there's stuff going on right now politically in the world. I'd just like to say, like, up front, we're not commenting on that in any way, shape, or form. We're talking about ancient texts and their perspectives, and I know some people bring them in and stuff like that, but we're not commenting on current military agendas. And I'm actually going to just give away my conclusion because I think it's important given the current context. I am going to conclude, and I think Van is concluding, and Mike's going to conclude, as I think Mike agrees here. We're all kind of in agreement that the story is not saying that this violence should be brought forward. Correct. It's actually saying the opposite. It's saying you can't, no one should be doing this. No one should be using divine justice, divine holy judgment. It should not be in the hands of humans. And so the conclusion, that's the conclusion in the end. We're going to take a long time to get there. Buckle up for a long stream, by the way, people. But like that being said, that's where we're going. And so it's not going to have a connection to people applying this literally in a modern context. It should not be done so. So that's where we will end up there. How we get there is going to be a while. I don't draw an equal sign between the modern state of Israel either and like what we're seeing in the Bible. As a Christian, I see Israel fulfilled and culminated in Jesus. This concept, the biblical concept of Israel, prophetic Israel, that kind of thing. So don't think that I'm drawing an equal sign in any way between modern Israel and ancient Israel in that way. Guys, any thoughts on that before we get to Kipp's video?
No, whenever you're ready, just let me know what you want to do and we will dive in. Okay.
Yeah. So right before we jump into it, let's. I think there's a really important question that we need to ask, and this one I ask. So I teach a small course on violence in the Bible at the college seminary, and I ask this question when I start the class, which is: do you think that God, if God exists, is allowed to end life in an act of judgment? Yes or no? And then if no, then you're honestly going to prefer certain approaches to these texts. You're probably going to be predisposed to them. If yes, then okay, God can end life in judgment, then that needs to be conceptualized. So putting some meat on it, do you think God could be just and right to flood the world, let's say? Like that, the Bible depicts God doing that. I don't think we can get away from that. That does say that. And it doesn't raise moral qualms about God judging and like decreating the world in that way, which I think that's what that text is getting at, like the decreation story. So can your view of God, if you hold one, accept that? If not, you kind of have to take a different hermeneutical route to texts like these if they're a part of your religious tradition. I think this is actually where the buck stops. Can God end life in judgment? Yes or no? And then we'll continue to talk about that. So another way of saying it would be, could God say to a group, like, you've lost the right to be creation in my world. You lose the privileges that come with it. You lose continuity on this planet, whether through a name remembered through children or the like. Does God have that right to take away all privileges, all things, and say, no, you're done. It's over. If not, you'll typically end up in different places. You'll probably even have a different eschatology than a lot of people, because typically traditional eschatology will be like God's going to put an end to the world. He's going to say, and we're done, right? Similar to the flood, and we're done. It's over. There's no like anything. It's just done. So you'll probably have a different eschatology as well. So I'm asking these preliminary questions because, as far as I can tell, the texts that we're discussing take a theological perspective where God can end human life in judgment. If you don't agree with that, that's actually fine. But these texts themselves claim that of God. And, and I'm trying to present the text view on this, right? I'm trying to engage these texts from the perspectives of their authors. They thought God could end life in judgment. So we got to figure out how to talk about that.
Yeah.
And I know some people will want to like punt to Jesus immediately, be like, well, no, go to Jesus, the picture there. I don't think that's going to help. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. I'm also, because this is so complex. There's so much to this, but I'm going to take a synchronic approach to this. So we're looking at how did the scribes who created this compilation of texts, what are they trying to teach in handing us this thing, this order, this arrangement? That approach, it assumes intentionality in the arrangement of the Old Testament, which I know a lot of people won't agree with, and we'll have to agree to disagree. I don't think that the scribes are just haphazardly throwing texts together. Yeah. So
makes sense.
we're trying to get in the minds of those scribes. Is that a fair approach, you guys think?
Yeah.
And even like a theological approach to the text, I think we're going there rather than we're going to go into historical investigations. I'm not going to make historical claims. I'm making claims about what the world this text is creating.
Correct.
That's more important. And I think the Bible is ideologically motivated that way. It's not wrong to be ideologically motivated. Every text in the ancient world, I think is it Quintilian? You guys might know this. Quintilian said that what's the quote? Like history is for instruction, not for like telling or something like that. I can't remember the citation. That's the paraphrase. But basically, all history telling is ideologically motivated. Like you don't get away from that in the ancient world. And so I think so I don't have all the answers, but we're gonna approach it from those methodological presuppositions. So everybody who's gonna come at us with a different methodological presupposition, please note, we just said these are our methodological presuppositions going into this discussion. Scribal intentionality in the composition of these texts and their macro form. But yeah, so I don't have all the answers in this. This stuff keeps me up at night. I'm trying to write stuff on it. I'm trying to work as much as I can in this subject. I think it's really important for our modern day. How do we conceptualize violence in the Old Testament, especially divine violence?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm open to changing my mind, by the way. So if anyone's out there that says, hey, you missed this, hey, you missed that. Yep, I probably did. I missed lots of things. So that's fine. What do you guys think?
I've changed my mind on this topic like every few months as I just dig more and more into different literature.
Yeah, no, I've also, and I've been tempted to go certain routes, and I still could see myself changing my mind on a lot of things. But we're going to present some like macro concepts that I think are pretty solid. Well, we can hop to the video now. Should we hop to Kipp's video?
Yeah, you may go to your time marker you set up there.
Yeah. I think 150 is where his video kind of starts.
All right, let's dive right in, and then I will stop it at when we're done through this time.
It was like no one was left, even though there were. And we see this in Joshua 10:20. It says, when Joshua and the sons of Israel finished striking them with a great blow until they were wiped out, comma. Then it says, and when the remnant that remained of them had entered into the fortified cities. Wait a minute, I thought the first part of the verse said they were wiped out, and now you're talking about a remnant.
Okay.
Comma's not there in the Hebrew, but yeah, okay.
It's not. Now we have to get into some of this and why it's problematic. So Michael's argument is that...
Okay.
All right, so that's where you told me to stop. Yes.
Yeah.
Just yes, we know there's no comma. That was just me being rhetorical.
Yeah, but even then, I think we can just talk about that for a sec. I don't understand why Kipp started the video this way. This was a really strange editing choice, because like the comma thing is like he's starting his critique off with the comma, and like there is actually like in Hebrew there's no comma like as a marker, but like you supply the meaning. Like the comma is just supplying meaning, right? And so it's just a dependent clause. So like in this text, when Joshua and the sons of Israel completed striking them with an exceedingly great strike, up to the point of bringing them to an end. And so it's a dependent clause, just like if I said, when I went to the store, or if I ate cheese, like, and then you put a comma in English to say that now you're finishing the thought, right? That dependent clause is now hanging on the next thing. If I ate cheese, then I'd be bloated. When I went to the store, then I threw a ball out the window. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up. Like it's just, that's all it is. So the comma is there in the Hebrew. I don't get why this is in his video. It's there in meaning, right? Like we supply that in English. Yeah. So I don't get that. Might just be an editing error, but he started the video that way, so we're commenting on it. The real contention, though, I think, is that Kipp has with you, Michael, is how you're interpreting this verse. So we're going to start with like some niche stuff here, Kipp's critique of you, and then we'll broaden out into harem as a broader concept.
Yep.
So does it say that Israel completely destroyed their enemies? It doesn't use harem language or even total kill language. So it's possible this verse actually doesn't support your contention. The Hebrew, I think I actually have the text in my, you want to throw up my PowerPoint?
Yeah, let's do that. So I'll put that up for you.
You need me to do
Hold
that,
up.
Mike?
Yeah, it's not. I'm clicking on. It's not letting me do. See if you can get it up.
Oh, it's because here.
Oh, I see what I did wrong. There we go. I fixed it.
Yeah.
Stupid StreamYard. All right, there we go.
Stupid StreamYard. Yeah, so here's the Hebrew. I've just given it to you and I've translated it there. And it just says what I said. When Joshua and the sons of Israel completed striking them with an exceedingly great strike, up to the point of bringing them to an end, then the survivors fled from them. So I think against your claim, Michael, so you're using this verse, if everybody's wondering, Michael's using this to say like, oh, it says it destroyed them completely, and then there were survivors, so it must be hyperbole. So that's what your claim is. Am I right, Michael?
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm following scholars like Kenneth Kitchen, for example. The first person I read made this argument. I saw others do it as well. It's the translation, how you translate the point of bringing them to an end. Specifically, is it what he was highlighting? Because some have translated that as wipe them out. And so, yeah, I wasn't saying this was like harem language. I was saying like you can kind of see like a hyperbolic aspect there, unless you disagree with the interpretation.
Yeah, I think I might, but I can understand why they would make that claim. The Hebrew is just ad tumam, until to end them, to bring them to an end. But that could just mean like dwindling them down. But actually, I think there's another reason why I don't think you're right in this being hyperbolic language. So if anyone was ever wondering, do people just go on Michael's channel to agree with him? I am saying Mike is wrong.
I only have people on who would completely agree with me because I'm so dogmatic. Yeah, that's right.
So if you look at the context, I don't think it works. So I think the text might implicitly condemn Israel for letting the enemies escape to the cities. I think that's the context. So the previous verse you see there, 10:19 says, "Pursue after your enemies and attack them from the rear. Do not allow them to go into their cities, for Yahweh your God has given them into your hand." Okay, so don't let them get away. But what happens? They get away. Israel lets them go to their cities. That's what the verse Joshua 10:20 says. The survivors, the people who got away, they fled from them. And then after that, notice what it says. No one spoke against the Israelites. So like what's going on like rhetorically here? Like what is this narrative getting at? I think that this might be a way of saying, hey, no one raised an issue why they didn't listen to Joshua in totally destroying the enemies and not letting them flee to the cities. He said, don't flee or don't let them escape. They escape, and then everybody's just hush, 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 right? And no one says anything. That seems to be what's going on in the story. So they let them flee to the cities in contradiction to Joshua's command to kill them. And I think that's actually what this text is about. The survivors aren't a part of hyperbole. They're a problem in the narrative because they shouldn't have survived because Israel actually failed to wipe them out. So if I were Kipp, I would have made that point against you. The text might imply Israel failed in destroying, now note this, the soldiers that they were facing in war. This is actually not a context about total kill. Like all man, woman, child, all like it doesn't use that language. If you go back to verses 10, Joshua 10:4 and 5 and 10:7, this is a military skirmish, specifically with soldiers going out to fight each other. So it's not even involved in that language of harem, total kill, like all that. So this is soldiers fighting in a war, and then they escape, and then everybody's just hush hush about it. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that there aren't texts that use total kill language. So by the way, everybody, total kill language is a typical way you talk about this. The idea of man, woman, child, old, young, male, female, like this complete anything that breeds, like destroying those groups. That is the total kill language is often applied to that. So in this specific text, I don't think it's talking about that. It's talking about soldiers and how they didn't actually do it. They got back to the cities, and it's a critique. No one spoke against them for failing. What do you think?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, I totally agree. There were survivors. Like I'm not sure how that really like affects what I think Kitchen was trying to say about this. I think his whole point in his book was just like you have some type of language that talks about bringing them to an end or wiping them out, but obviously his point was like the whole narrative as a whole clearly suggests that there are survivors. The survivors are obviously not part of the hyperbole. He was just focusing on that one issue. And again, if it's not translated properly, then I think you'd be right. But I think what Kitchen's point is that bringing them to an end or wiping them out obviously is not meant to be literal when he was looking at it, because if we look at the survivors, they're not part of the hyperbole. So, and of course, yeah, there's other verses where there's just total destruction language. I went to this one because I think it was just a clear place where you could just sort of show, hey, here's a line that could be hyperbolic, but look at the larger context. Obviously, the survivors aren't part of the hyperbole.
Yeah, so I think that I would just contest this particular verse, and I think that your broader point stands. And so we can move to that. Yeah. I've already said what I think is going on here. I think that they're being critiqued, right? The Israelites were not, they were wrong for not defeating all the soldiers. The Israelites were wrong for not letting them escape. That's what I think it's saying when it says no one spoke out against the Israelites. But I just want to. Yeah.
I just want to say there's nothing I disagree with you there. I think I'm just following Kitchen, and that the whole point was just showing that how there is hyperbole just sort of in the text, various places, and this was just one of his examples he brings up. Yeah.
Sure. Sounds good. But I do think this is important. So what I just said about the narrative doesn't spell out for you what's going on. Like, it doesn't tell you the moral of the story, right? Like when it says no one spoke out against the Israelites, it doesn't say, and that was bad, right? It doesn't say that. And so this is actually really important. And people might be wondering, like, why are we belaboring this? We're belaboring this because this involves our presuppositions when it comes to reading Hebrew Bible narratives. It's just very important. So it's my opinion, and I'm not alone, that many of the morals and lessons in the Hebrew Bible they're not spelled out for you. Right. You're supposed to think really hard about the text and characters. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is that this is not Sunday school. We're going to discuss things that are not Sunday school. We're talking about deep, reflective readings of stories, often across the stretch of many, many chapters. Like you don't read Lord of the Rings and look for pithy moral statements every page, right? You see characters develop. The topics get expanded on. Unexpected turns get taken. Stuff like that. You see the message across a long stretch of text. So I'm of the persuasion and that we need to come out of the Old Testament narratives, texts like this. I'm not the only one. There are lots of scholars in this perspective. So a really good entry-level book that just came out is Judd's Modern Genre Theory. And so he has a chapter on Hebrew narrative and just talks about how it's not black and white. It's not good guy versus bad guy. It's not cowboy tales, right? With a moral at the end and riding off with the horse into the sunset. You actually have to think about it. You actually have to think about, how does this develop? What is it getting at? What are the themes that are going on? And that's where you see what the text is trying to do.
Joel admitted that the Bible is just fiction like Lord of the Rings.
Jeez.
Dang it. Got me.
If Joel, on that topic, what do you think about Christine Hayes's lecture series on this? Would you recommend that for somebody?
No, I haven't seen Christine Hayes. I haven't seen that particular lecture series. No.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, great.
It's great. So so for anybody that is interested, not only what Joel just said, but if you're trying to listen to something, if you just type in Christine Hayes Joshua narratives or something like that on YouTube, I think it's called Living in the Land or something like that. It's the lecture series. Mike, do you remember off the top of your head what it is?
Because what was this for?
She covers this, and she covers.
She just is going through the Hebrew Bible. She's going through various aspects. She starts in the Torah, works her way up. It's just a good series to listen to. I listened to it many years ago. It's been out for a long time, but we digress. Let's get back into what we're doing here.
Lecture 12, the I can't say the word, Deuteronomistic history.
Deuteronomistic, yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, I haven't seen that one. Yeah,
cool. So,
so that's what we're going to be approaching the text with, that presupposition. But do you want to hop to the next clip?
Yeah, I'm going to get to a couple super chats here, then we're going to jump to that because these are piling up. So I'll get to these pretty quick. Mike, in your idealism view, is gender just physical or in some way the physical manifestation of mental characteristics too? Much love, guys. God bless. Yeah, I didn't think about that too much, but I'd have to say they're probably more of a manifestation of mental characteristics, because if you're an idealist, the physical is a manifestation of who you are in a lot of ways. And we would reject these strong dualistic aspects that the mental and the physical are divorced. Like the physical is supposed to be a manifestation of who you are mentally. So you can check out the book Idealism, New Essays in Metaphysics for more on that. Although they don't talk about this issue specifically. They talk more about self and being. Yeshua the King says, I've never had an issue with literal readings of the worst verses in the Bible, but I highly appreciate you guys doing this. God bless. You're appreciated. What are you guys' thoughts on the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Yeah, I don't think they're heretical necessarily. They may have been at times, depending on their rejection of the Trinity. I do think it's kind of weird how much they elevate the visions and the teachings of Ellen G. White. That could be problematic, but that they have watered that down over the years, as far as I can tell. Joe says, I used to listen to Mike Winger a lot, but I don't anymore. That's right. He moved over here, ladies and gentlemen, to a much more sophisticated and less nerdy channel, as he should. I've heard you mention him a few times, but I don't know what your thoughts are on Mike Winger. Yeah, Mike and Winger and I have disagreements. I think, but we're still cool with each other. I mean, I think for the most part, we get along pretty well. He's a pretty cool dude if you ever meet him in person. Do you think Joshua possibly being made around King Josiah's time affects the narrative in a way that we don't see in other books? Possibly. I tend to put Joshua closer to that as of now, unless I can be convinced otherwise. Of course, I used to put 5 books of Moses around there, even after. But I mean, I wouldn't. As far as this stream, I don't think it really relates too much to the whole issue. But I'd have to think more about that. But it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I mean, it affects. So I can just quickly comment that it
Yeah,
affects.
go ahead.
Yeah. It affects kind of how the text gets applied to its first context. So if you're dealing with a text that's going on like time of Josiah, much later on, how they actually apply that, a history lesson, so to speak, from way back could be very different than the actual thing occurring way back, right? Again, not speaking historically or anything like that, but just the application could change in a different context much later in Israel's history, where there are ostensibly no real Canaanites around.
Yeah. John the Presbyter. Do you know about John the Presbyter, Joel?
You've mentioned John the Presbyter a few times.
Yeah. Ali Dawa and his
I don't know anything except that. Yeah.
So we've had John the Presbyter, and now we have John the Presbyter. Even though God told the Israelites not to mate with the Canaanites, Rahab assimilated with Israel. So is the not mating with the Canaanites only for the ones who don't believe in Adonai?
Ooh.
Well, I mean, if they're assimilated, they sort of become part of Israel. I think is the implication there. It's not about it's about not assimilating with people who have a different culture. I think is what the commands tend to focus on. I think that was some of the issues.
Yeah, I think Joel push back if you think I'm off here, but I think the do not mate with the Canaanites commands, we have to ask why they're asking that. That's the command. And if you look at the biblical meta narrative, what you find is that intermarrying with other pagan peoples poses a threat for Yahweh only worship. And so it's not about who they believe, but it's more so about where their deity allegiance lies in. So Rahab gets assimilated in because she is somebody that decides to worship Yahweh and reject the false gods. And then that's an instance where you see the outsiders become insiders. And in the Hebrew Bible, you find a lot of... Go ahead.
So just Ruth as another example.
Yeah. And so you see a lot of role reversals happening like that too.
Yeah, Moses marrying a Midianite woman. That definitely is a theme.
Yeah. Thank you for the super chat, and then we'll do one more before we move on. Than, One Piece when? The One Piece is real, and it is the one piece of the Injil that's finally disproved Islam. You see? Oh, hi, IP. Still...
I will watch One Piece when I have time to dedicate my life to 3 years of anime.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm like, heck no, I don't have that kind of time. But that could be another possibility. Every Muslim apologist has a different explanation for what the Injil is. So this could be another one they might use. Who knows? All right, let me I'm getting more into Islam, and if atheists would stop bothering me, I would just transition to it. But no. All right. You ready to get back to this video?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Argument is that we have these other analog texts from the ancient Near East where they use hyperbolic language to exaggerate the extent of the destruction that they've committed upon their enemies. I've got a few things to say. if these texts, the text in Joshua, if they are merely employing warfare rhetoric, does this exempt the possibility that they can also be descriptions of genocide and wanton destruction of non-combatants? One doesn't necessarily preclude the other. I think that's important to note.
All right, you want me to stop there?
Yeah. That's at 253.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just wanted to point out that it's a good point, that last bit. We're going to talk more about the idea, even if it's hyperbolic, does it mean that there's not the death of non-combatants? So we're going to conceptualize all that violence in these texts for actually most of what we're going to be doing. So that's a good point by him. Do you want to hit the next one there?
Yep. Here I go.
Are the conquest stories the same types of texts as these examples of warfare rhetoric? Now, everything that Michael has been citing are royal inscriptions. In all of these examples, there's no question of the employment of hyperbole and its intention. But are these texts equitable comparative works to the conquest narratives themselves? Royal inscriptions are, in the first place, intended for the gods. Kings erect these and they write on them as a form of devotion to their own deity. They're not even necessarily intended to be read, certainly not read widely. It's not the point. You're dealing with something quite different when you're looking at the narrative account in the book of Joshua. Both are forms of propaganda, but different kinds of propaganda.
Yeah.
All right.
So really quickly on this, so Kipp's saying that there's the parallel texts with hyperbole that do exist. So you've pointed them out. There are parallel texts of hyperbole, and we're going to actually get into that more, that they're all royal inscriptions and not the same genre as Joshua. He's saying that they're both propaganda, but different kinds of propaganda. This is actually an interesting question. I'm very interested in it, but it has to be explored in an article or something before I can comment on it. As far as I'm aware, this is actually Kipp's observation, and so it's not something in the literature. So it's worth considering. And Kipp's a scholar, so great. It's very interesting. Good. Yeah. But I just we need to see more. And I mean, I don't know, just because something's a royal inscription and then you have a narrative text about warfare, that there couldn't still be the same kinds of things going on, like the same kinds of hyperbole. Because in our modern context, you could say they annihilated them. That works for a sports announcer, and it actually works for a political commentator on warfare. Yeah. Even if it doesn't mean you literally killed every single one in either context, or just defeated everyone in either context, right? So I think these kinds of linguistic phenomena can stretch across genre, and I think it's too tight. He's asking for something too tight there.
So when I heard this was kind of and let me know what you think, I guess, Joel. My intuition is that maybe we're poking at the wrong thing. And what I mean when I say that is, maybe what you want to ask a different question is the hyperbolic rhetoric going to be a result of the genre of the text itself, or is it going to be more fundamentally the result of the cultural Milo that the works are embedded in? So analogously, imagine 1,000, 2,000 years from now or whatever, somebody looks at a meme and some dude's at a gas station and the caption is me gassing up my homie at the gas station. So because today we have a saying, gassing up, to hype up your friends and stuff like that, right? And then 2,000 years later, the person seeing the meme is confused because you don't put gas in people, you put gas in cars. But then later they hear a song and the lyrics say, "Oh, I'm gassing up my homies," or something like that, and they put two and together and they realize gassing up means you're hyping up your friends. Well, would it make sense to not apply the meaning of gassing up to the meme then, just because they're different genres, even though they find that hyperbolic that saying arising in different genres? Do you get what I'm trying to ask there?
That's basically exactly what I was trying to say. You probably said it better than I did. Yeah, exactly. These kinds of things cross beyond just genre. They can cross into different discourses, essentially. I don't know why we have to limit it to one small one, like a royal inscription or something.
Yeah.
Okay, want to go back to my PowerPoint? Because we're going to skip a whole bunch of Kipp's video just for the sake of time. So Kipp spends, 5 minutes describing what our main topic today is, which is harem. Harem or haram. So basically, what we're dealing with is a particular topic related to this term usually. So it's this term, cherem, haram. Cherem is the noun form, haram is a verb form. And so Kipp spends about 5 minutes discussing it, and he does it pretty well. I think he actually outlines it quite well. And he uses Hallout. It's a specific lexicon that it's really great. It's a good lexicon to talk about it. But I want to just briefly talk about what this term is as we get into it. And I think it's important just to briefly comment on it. So here we have from BDB, another really popular and scholarly lexicon. Can you see my mouse if I'm moving it?
Yep, we can see it all.
Yeah. So basically this term, the noun, cherem, and its cognate verbal form, haram. So to haram something, to devote, to exterminate, to ban, something like that. And then when it's a noun, it's like a thing that is banned, a thing that is devoted, a thing that is exterminated. I just want to show like kind of the world that this word is operating in, because it appears in a lot of these contexts that we're going to be talking about, and it's really important. So you can see this is idea of it has to do with like sacred devotion, sacredly devoted to a deity. So in cognates languages, you've got prohibited, forbidden, unlawful, become sacred, make sacred, inviolable, prohibit from common use, consecrate to God. So the term often you'll find in a Bible is translated in certain contexts as like utterly destroy, but it's kind of coming from this root idea of being consecrated over to a deity. That's really important here. Like that's actually very, very important. It doesn't just mean destroy. It has this. It's in this conceptual realm of devoted to a deity, and so whatever context it's devoted in is going to change what that devotion might look like. See here, ban, devote, often for devoting to destruction, cities of Canaanites and other neighbors of Israel, destroying or appropriating their possessions, inhabitants as well, destroying. Devote. Now, note down here as well. Devote to for sacred uses. So it's not just about destroying. You can devote something for sacred use, to be given over to Yahweh or given over to a god, to be put under the ban, devoted to death for worshiping other gods than Yahweh, and then also devoted to the temple treasures. So again, what I'm trying to point out here is that the term goes beyond just destroy, right? It's devotion to the deity. This is, again, crucial for our conceptualizing this. Here is DCH, Dictionary of Classical Hebrew. And in this one, you'll see it says destroy, usually devote or to ban of destruction, destroy, also dedicate to Yahweh, thereby excluding redemption. So dedication or devotion to destruction. And then the noun cherem, a devoted object, that which is banned, excluded from profane use, and devoted to Yahweh for destruction or religious use. So it's given over to Yahweh, something devoted to Yahweh, and it can't be touched by anything else. That's essentially what this term is getting at here. And so that's what Kipp goes over. He does point out in the video, and rightly so, that it's a pretty extreme term in the ancient world. It's attested a few times. So it's not coming out. It doesn't happen a lot in the text that we have. So when you're in war, and when hostility is involved, usually that means the destruction of the opposing city. When this term is used, it's going to mean destroy them. So that meaning does so devote them to destruction, devote them to Yahweh to destruction. That happens in the context of war, but there are other contexts as well where it's just devote to religious use. So things can be devoted to Yahweh's temple, so to speak. So again, devoting to Yahweh. So his definition, Kipp's, is good. He relies again on Hallout. It's an excellent lexicon. So I will just say I agree with his general definition. Now it's actually, how does this play out, right? So good. We won't listen to it. He does a good job on that. Let's go to actually his kind of critique, his further critique of you, Michael.
All right, let's play this section, and then I will we'll stop it at the time marker.
In the Old Testament, one appears in Joshua chapter 6 with regard to the Adam offerings, and the other appears in 1 Samuel chapter 15. In Joshua chapter 6 through 8, this is Joshua's conquest of the city of Jericho specifically, and then the city of Ai directly thereafter. And in this story, Joshua delivers the command from Yahweh that you are to commit everything to the ban. You are to utterly destroy everything. Everything is part of the cherem of Yahweh. He goes on to say that you are to kill everything with the sword, man and woman, young and old, sheep and goat. Leave nothing left that breathes a lie. The text goes on to say that this is what Joshua did. Joshua and his armies destroyed everything and everyone in the city of Jericho that breathed, and then burned it all. This was the fulfillment of the Cherem. Now, what happens in this story, a lot of you know this story in the book of Joshua. There's a fellow by the name of Achan, son of Carmi, Achan in English. He, we are told, keeps back some silver and a garment. As a result of this, the text goes on to say that the fury of Yahweh was kindled, because not everything was committed to the ban. Achan managed to save a couple of small items, non-living items, for himself. The Israelites then go and attack Ai, a much smaller city, we're told in the text, than Jericho, and they're routed by the people of Ai, and they're frustrated and they're upset because they've lost, they've had casualties. This wasn't supposed to happen. What is happening? Yahweh explains that they have committed an egregious act, that they've held back from the devoted thing, from the Cherem, and he says, you need to look after this. If you do not look after the Cherem prescriptions and fulfill them, fulfill your vow, give to me what you promised you would, then I'm going to make a Cherem out of you, is what he says. So they go through the process of coming to discover who has held back devoted items from Yahweh, and as a result, Achan and his entire family and his clan are wiped out. They're killed and they're burned. They're covered over with stones. The moral of the story is that you cannot hold back when it comes to the Cherem. You have to follow through with it in its totality. That is the point. So it doesn't do any good to suggest that we're just using hyperbolic language when we're talking about the slaughter of the Canaanites in this regard, because this is precisely the point. This was a Cherem offering to Yahweh, which means he required all of it. Everything was committed to destruction. That's what the narrative is telling us. That's where we're at with hyperbole. You can't apply it to these texts. It doesn't work. This is a sacred act, the devotion of everything to Yahweh. It's radical and it's total. It's an expression of extreme fealty to the God that is out of character.
All right. This is where you said
Did
to
you get
stop
it?
it on your time marker. Yep.
1407? Yep.
Mhm.
Nice. Sorry, I'm just plugging my computer in. Okay. I forgot to plug my computer in.
I just like look back at you and you're like falling all over the place.
I am. Yeah. Welcome to my normal life. Ask my students. This guy's a mess. What's he doing? Yeah. Okay. So I want to note a few things. I think this is where Kipp I think you would agree, Mike, Kipp goes astray here in his claim. So he said specifically, Cherem equals not hyperbole. Cherem is total, right? Am I wrong? He said that, right?
That's what he said. Yep.
And did you hear that too?
That's how I heard the objection stated. Did we pass over the part where he brought up the T-dot entry where he talked about the negative as a means to kind of reinforce what he's saying too? Or
I just skipped it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think this is an important part of the video for providing a critique of Kipp's argument. So he states when people are haremed, it means they are completely destroyed no matter what. No survivors, no nothing. That is the language used. So we're all agreeing that's the language used. And I have no doubt this is extreme and totalitizing language. But Kipp says hyperbole doesn't apply for harem. And I don't think this is correct. This is not how the biblical text describes what happens to those who actually faced harem. So what do I mean? So if you want to throw up my slides, the biblical text itself acknowledges it's using hyperbole, I think. We have texts that say a city was completely haremed, but yet a chapter or two later, the town still exists. So the language of harem applied to these towns. So I'm going to read it because I think it's actually important, just that everyone can hear it. Then Horam, king of Gezer, came up to Lachish, and Joshua struck him and his people until he left no survivor behind. Then Joshua returned to Debir and all of Israel with him, and they fought against it. And he captured it and its king and all its cities, and they struck them down with the edge of the sword, and they harrimed all the people that were in it. He left behind no survivor, just as he did to Hebron. Just as he did to Hebron. So just names. Get the names in your heads, everybody. Gezer, Debir, Hebron. Thus he did to Debir and its king what he had done to Libnah and its king. So Joshua struck all the land, the hill country, the Negev, the Shephelah, and the slopes, and all their kings. He left behind no survivors, and all that breathed he harrimed, as Yahweh, the God of Israel, commanded. Okay, again, note what it says. Not just about Debir, but all the cities that faced harem, including Hebron, also with Gezer. Now I want to show you a couple chapters later. Same book. Caleb drove out from there. In the context, it's Hebron, 3 of Anak's sons, Sheshai, Ahamai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak. And from there, he went up against the inhabitants of Debir. Wait, what? What Debir? Debir was totally harrimed. Hebron was totally harrimed. And Caleb said, whoever attacks, blah, 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 blah. Verse 10, but they did not drive out the Canaanites who were dwelling in Gezer. And so the Canaanites lived in the midst of Ephraim to this day, but they became forced laborers. Does everybody see the problem? I just showed you a text that says they were totally harrimed. No survivors at all. And then a few chapters later, there are survivors. They're there in the towns. How does that make sense? Right? So when Kipp says harem means no matter what, there's no hyperbole, and that the people are just totally wiped out, that just doesn't seem to be the case in the text itself. I think Kipp misses this in his response video. He says hyperbole doesn't apply for harem. I think it does. I think he's objectively wrong, unless someone can show me in this text why we're missing something here. But if we're taking these texts as coherent within a few chapters of each other, I think he's wrong. What do you guys think?
No, I see where you're coming from. And I think I remember an interview they did with like Mark Lucher, and he talked about there being degrees of harem, for example. So like, it's not exactly the same thing you're saying, but it is kind of a similar aspect there. So yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from. It does seem to be the case based on what you presented.
Yeah. Dan, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, and this kind of bleeds into one of the things that, I don't know if you wanted to get into this, but the whole first half of Joshua versus second half, even though it's not technically the way you might compartmentalize it, where it's like the first half of Joshua describes the super rapid, indefinite, total conquest and destruction, but it's the latter half of Joshua, you get this idea where it's like gradual displacement, and Joshua ends with Joshua being really old and saying there's still much land to be taken over. And it's kind of like, what do you do with that? Kind of, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. That kind of bleeds into what we were saying earlier.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think we talked in private about Matt Lynch's book, where he talks about the majority report and the minority report. Like majority report, everything was totally defeated, gone. Minority report, well, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that does seem to be going on in the book of Joshua, which again, we're talking about literarily, what's this text doing, right?
Correct.
It's using totalitizing language, this complete total kill language, but at the same time acknowledging they actually didn't destroy everyone in these towns. So what's going on there? I think there is, at least it is clear that there is hyperbole going on. Yeah. Okay, so I think this point about non-combatants, that we can kind of come back to that. We could dig into that a little bit here as well. That is important to think about. I think this is where a lot of people struggle, and I struggle actually myself, to be honest. So we see statements like "kill everything that breathes" in some contexts in tandem with harem commands. There's a bunch of different phrases. Some like we saw like we see even in this text here. I've given you Joshua 6:21. The harem and all the city, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, donkeys, with the edge of the sword. I've also given you the Mesha inscription there at the bottom, which uses similar language. So what's going on with this language of kill everything that breathes? Or other things of this idea of totalitizing language? Well, if you think about the phrase kill everything that breathes, semantically, it says kill everything that breathes, right? So I don't have that text in front of us here, but it's one of the common phrases that we see. Yeah, but there are a lot of things that breathe that the Israelites did not kill, right? That's obvious. They didn't kill rabbits and birds and squirrels. Like, they didn't actually kill everything that breathes. It's a hyperbolic statement And pragmatically, that is what the text is actually going to try and get to happen, like what it's trying to command. What the text actually means is kill every human, or perhaps even every human and cattle. But it's hyperbolic language to convey that the killing must be complete and without pity. So again, we know that the statement "kill everything that breathes" is hyperbolic. They aren't killing squirrels, but it would still ostensibly and pragmatically refer to all humans they encounter. The hyperbole could also then be another like illocutionary means of just indicating show no mercy to everyone you encounter. Now, maybe you could say, go ahead.
With regards to Joshua 6, I do know Richard Hess talks about this a little bit. He thinks he doesn't use the term hyperbole. In fact, he doesn't even like that. He uses it as stereotypical language. So what he says is, what then are readers to make of the references that Joshua and Israel killed everyone, men and women in Jericho? Literally, the expression in both places are the same, from man until woman. This expression occurs elsewhere 6 times, referring to Amalek, to Nob, Jerusalem under David, to Jerusalem during Ezra's time, and to Israel. It always preceded by all, and thus appears to be stereotypical for describing everyone, whether there are actually women, children, or in the case of Jericho and Ai, non-combatants present. If these are set ways of saying everyone, then they imply nothing about the presence of non-combatants who are otherwise not mentioned or named in the stories of Joshua. So he seems to be. I thought he was on the same page with you. I'm not sure, but I wasn't sure what you thought of that.
Yeah. I think we're saying the same thing. It's saying kill everyone. That I think it is actually saying that, and it's using a certain kind of phraseology to do so. I don't know if it would be fair to say there weren't non-combatants, and we'll get more to that in a second. We're going to talk about Deuteronomy 20, because that actually, I think, kind of pushes against what he's saying. So let's just keep going on, and I'll, because I think he might be he's taking it kind of as a merism. I have merism up there on the top of the slide, right? Yeah. So some people do make the argument for a merism. Merism is when you use the extreme of 2 things as a way of stating a whole of something in the class. So heaven and earth is all creation. Man, woman, young, old would mean any human, right? And then this language would almost be another way of saying kill everything that breathes, right? It's almost saying the exact same thing. Just kill any human. In this interpretation, that I think in the one you just said as well, the commands to kill man, woman, young, and old would be stating the idea is kill every human you encounter. And then some would want to say that they wouldn't encounter women and children in battlefields or cities as battlefields. That was the take that you just said. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's what Hess was trying to get at. Yeah.
So I honestly, I would love, like, just my own personal, like, that'd be great if that were true, if that's what the text were saying, but I just don't quite see that it uses that language. And so again, we're dealing with the hardest part of this, because it's like a totalizing language of, like, you just lose, everyone is gone. It's a wipeout. It's a flood, right? And so that's tough. And the reason I don't agree with that fully is because of Deuteronomy 20, and that text states that wars with hostile cities far away from Israel were occasions when Israel could take in children and women as captive of war. But hostile Canaanite cities that were close by, are not to have women and children taken as captives of war. The distinct, and instead it says harem, like everybody, all the Canaanites. This distinction seems to indicate that women and children were anticipated as among those who died in the hostile Canaanite skirmishes, where Canaanite cities were hostile to Israel and attacked them. And I actually think this is that's contested, but I do think that's the case, that it's about there's a hostility going on here. We're going to get back to that. Back to man and woman, young and old. For this reason, I think that Deuteronomy 20 and other passages, I find it hard to interpret these texts as stating that non-combatants were expected to be exempt from the violence. And of course, when I say non-combatants, that's like a modern conception, right? Like, these aren't people going off to war way off on the other side of the sea or something, right? In the ancient world, I think it's naive to think that wives were not rooting for, providing for, aiding their husbands in military endeavors. I think that's kind of a low view of women in the ancient world. We see texts where women are fighting or throwing stones down from a wall or whatever, right? Like that's a reality. So if the judgment Israel is bringing is depicted as God's own divine judgment, much like the flood, and we're going to argue that it is, then women are no less guilty in this case. So this is a divine judgment in that sense. It's like the flood coming on Canaan. So we're going to talk more about that in a minute. We're actually going to spend most of our time. This is going to be a long stream.
Yeah.
But we're going to spend a lot of time on like conceptualizing how it's actually showing, using these themes. Of course, I find the idea of children involved in this very difficult. We're going to talk about that a bit later as well. But I think the sticking point. So now we're going to get our finger on this. I think the sticking point for a lot of people is that human hands are involved. I think often.
Mhm.
Like I admit that like I find my modern mind doesn't like that. I don't like that. I find it less. So personally, here's my own personal disposition. I find it less troubling to envision God bringing a flood and removing people from his creation. To me, I just go, and some people don't like that text. I just go like, no, God has that prerogative. If God says, no, I'm sorry, you don't have the right to live. You don't have the privileges of life anymore. I'm revoking them. I'm personally okay with that. Some people aren't okay with that. Like, but to me, that's God's prerogative. It's when God uses humans as an agent in the judgment, then I find that tough. So to even get our heads around this, I think we need to do like a deep dive. Another thing, do you guys have any thoughts on that before I keep going?
I don't think so.
Nothing on my end.
Do you kind of agree? Do you find that same kind of tension? I don't know. I don't know your theology.
With which we just covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I don't. I don't have it in front of me, but I have read something on the psychology of that it may not. And I'd have to look at it again. That there are people that were contesting that, but this psychologically it wasn't that bad in terms of like how it affected the soldiers. But I have to remember.
I've read that too. Yeah, I don't know about that. It would depend on how someone is accustomed or acclimated to certain traumas, I think. And, I remember reading that as well. I'm trying to remember who wrote that, but I don't know about that. And it's a good point. An ancient psychology is not going to be the exact same as our psychology, for sure. Yeah. You're going to be accustomed to way more death, children dying around you all the time, like just from childbirth and that kind of thing, and the mortality rate being way lower. Yeah, so there will be certainly a higher tolerance for that kind of thing. But I don't know if I like that argument particularly. It's a bit of an assumption for one. It seems
like really related to the problem of evil in general. I think you cannot get into this topic without digging into philosophy in general.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that.
And people, Joel, I know you don't know my approach to the problem of evil. We can talk about it one day if you want to, but I think some of the stuff that I've put together with my theodicy kind of applies here, and kind of helps us see with a clearer picture. But I'm not going to derail the conversation right now, so
that's fine. I think another thing, I'll just keep going. Another thing that we need to consider for texts like Deuteronomy 20, where it's for those who are in the cities nearby to harem them, is the genre of ancient law. So they don't read law like we read law. They saw these texts as guides, but not black and white rules to be followed on every single occasion. And I think this is actually really important for how these texts get applied. So I've cited, actually, I think probably the greatest scholar who's ever lived in biblical studies here. This is Korytko from 2023.
Yeah, he's cool, but he never shuts up.
I'm like, who am I going to cite for an epistemic authority of the law? I'll just cite myself.
There you go.
I'm not the guy who's figured this stuff out. I have in footnotes there. I won't. Basically, what I outlined here just at the end of my book, because I rely on this as like a way of kind of conceptualizing what was going on in the Septuagint, perhaps, is that laws in the ancient Near East, like these law codes we find, many scholars, like a lot of scholars, are concluding that they're not meant to be taken like a if X then Y. If X happens, then always do Y. In every case, bring it to court, charge him. And rather, Vroom here, who I'm relying on, and he has a bibliography you can see in the citation there. He calls it an epistemic authority. So it's guiding the way you think about something, but it's not giving you a like one size fits all approach, so to speak. So different applications could happen with laws, including laws that we see in Deuteronomy. So, for example, pulling an example forward, Rahab, that story contradicts Deuteronomy 20. Deuteronomy 20 says harem them, but Rahab is not haremed. It's like, but they're applying the law in a certain way. And then we're going to find later on, when we talk a little bit further, that later authors, when they're reading Deuteronomy, do not apply Deuteronomy 20 in a literal way. So they're finding different applications for these laws, right? So the text, that something like Deuteronomy 20 and Joshua, they're not giving us every detail that we wish we had, but I think there's stuff going on under the surface when it comes to genre and how they're applying these laws as well. And I think the text problematizes some of it as well. Okay, so we're going to hop to some more here in a second. There are a few ways that people try to, or people will get away from these commands, and I think it's helpful just to quickly say what they are. So one way that some people will kind of go away from them is by saying that Joshua is not a historical text, and that the Israelites never did these things. Kipp states this in his video. I think that could help in a way, but the portrait of God and the theology, they still remain in my mind. If someone wants to go that way, I don't think Joshua is providing exact history myself. I think Joshua 12, for example, states that Joshua gave the land of Megiddo to the Israelites, but later we find out that that happens like a century later. So I think the text is actually like telescoping this and like, hey, Joshua gave them this land. Yeah, Joshua gave them this land, but actually Joshua did not give them this land. That they got that later, and it's just like compressing things in, right? So I think Joshua's doing some of that, but if someone did want to avoid like the moral implications of God commanding violence in these texts, while at the same time not dismissing the violence depicted in them, and maintaining even a high view of Scripture. What's that there?
Boyd's book, Crucifixion of the Warrior God.
Yeah.
If you're interested in somebody taking a route that like Joel's describing.
Yeah. Have you read through it?
Yeah.
Oh man, I have read the whole thing as well. That took so long.
Yeah, I feel you.
I had it on audiobook, and I swear I was like 4 months just listening to this book.
It took longer than One Piece.
Yeah. Crucifixion of the Warrior God is the One Piece. Okay, you can say that. So basically the idea is that you could say the compiler of Joshua and the audience for whom that author compiled the text had like an agreement on what the scroll of Joshua, or even Samuel for that matter, was doing. So when an author writes something, there's a place in society, in their minds, there's an agreement, like an unspoken agreement between the author and the audience, like a slot this is going to fit into, right? Where this literature is going in their minds. And so if it is fiction and wasn't taken as historical fact from the start, but is rather talking about Israel in a long, long ago, and how they've kind of failed to do things, and how they took this power into their hands, and all these these texts from back then, that could lessen the violence in it. The original author and the audience would then be like they'd be aware that the violence is meant to be like a medium for a lesson about Israelites in the past, perhaps their inability to wield divine judgment, but not actually like a historical fact. Like they would say it's not really actually what happened, but that's possible. So it's like metaphorical in that way. They take it as a metaphor later on. That's tempting. What did you think of that approach, Stan, when you read through Crucifixion of the Warrior God?
It's been a really long time, so I can't really give you my full thoughts on that off the top of my head. I can give you the impression I have after all these years from it, which is just that it feels methodologically cherry picky, maybe like that from a bird's eye view. I don't know. I have to. It's been a while since I've gone that deep into it. I'm more so really interested in just kind of figuring out what the first readers of the text would have taken it to mean. All these things. That's
yeah. And I mean, Boyd is kind of, he's not really taking, or I can't remember exactly his he's such a big book, but he does kind of focus on like finding the spirit of like a cross-centric view of certain texts, and like he kind of splits verses up and stuff in doing so, and I thought that methodologically was a bit unsound too. But even when you talk about, you could kind of do this with the original first readers of the book, because like a bit of a less extreme route would be to say that like, okay, whenever Joshua is being written, well, people have known, like we know that the nations that were haremed, like they didn't exist later on. So if Joshua was written later on, it's looking at these nations like they don't actually exist anymore. A lot of them, like, I mean, the Egyptians did, but they would have been like an earlier Egyptian kind of group.
Yeah.
And so maybe these first readers would have not read these commands as directives to themselves, they would have made like metaphors out of them to remove idolatry, because like those nations don't exist anymore. We're not killing those nations. So what do? Oh, we exterminate idolatry from within us. But those people are gone. They're long gone. That's in the past. Like that is a way to do it, and that's one way to think about it. So that would be a non-violent application of the book for its first readers. I think that's plausible. I think Matt Lynch gets into that a little bit in his book Flood and Fury.
He does, yeah. Towards the end of Lynch's book is what I'm playing around with and trying to figure out where he goes, because at the end of Lynch's book, more specifically, he doesn't deny violence wholesale, but he says that the targets of harem were the symbols of power. So like the kings themselves, the fortress walls, weapons, and
Right.
I want to say jewelry, but that's not the right word. But you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. That would.
Well,
it's a way of doing it.
Is what he says in the book.
Wealth. He said wealth.
Yeah. So he says I'll just read this. He says, moreover, the focus of Israel's destructive energies was directed against the 4 symbols of imperial power present in Canaan: warlords, walled cities, weapons of war, and wealth.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, totally. That makes sense. Again, you can take that kind of approach of the first readers, if it's written a bit later, would have taken it as non-violent. Yeah. There's also the accommodation view, the idea that this is ancient Near Eastern tribal warfare. God kind of steps into their world with them. Yeah, Jesus loved the Canaanites. This would be like
not really accommodation, but
yeah. Siebert's view, if I remember correctly. There are a few people who take this view. I think Enns takes this view. Like it's ancient Near Eastern tribal warfare.
I don't see that as truly like mutually exclusive to a lot of the other views that we're talking about here either. I think they're all kind of poking. I think everybody's poking at something that's true and just kind of trying to make a method out of one thing. But
the problem I have with the accommodation view, actually, I got a citation here from Trim from The Destruction of the Canaanites. So one problem with this accommodation view is that the word harem and events that look like genocide are relatively rare in the ancient Near East. So I just told you guys that a second ago, right? As noted earlier, a few texts record kings proclaiming that they killed everyone and conquered a city, but overall harem-type destruction is uncommon. Rather than accommodating himself to the cultural surroundings in which he meets the Israelites in their ethical ignorance, but begins the process of elevating them beyond their cultural context, Yahweh appears to have gone beyond the standard warfare patterns in intensity. So you see what he's saying there? This is actually like really intense stuff for the ancient world, even, which I know, like in you don't want to read that quote necessarily on an apologetics channel always, right? But it's the reality. Like this is intense. This is really intense. And if God was just accommodating them, it's a strange accommodation to go backwards a little bit, right? So I don't know if it works. So I appreciate that Trim can point that out. That it's a backwards motion at that point. Then. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because if it's going to be an accommodation, it would make more sense. It'd fall more in line with like Webb and Ostie's redemptive movement hermeneutic idea than a backwards one.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, if it's redemptive, it's like, why did he start way back even further with like even more violent than is typical, right?
Yeah.
So it's a thought.
The one of the things that I guess Webb and Ostie have talked about this a little bit, but maybe you know of somebody that talks about this a little bit. One is going to be I haven't really seen anybody actually incorporate detailed philosophy of war into their approach with this. But then the other thing that I always end up asking myself is like, what are God's obligations to the Israelites themselves, given the fact that he's actually like made a covenant with them and all this other stuff? Maybe let's just say there is some sort of backwardsness to this. I do you get what I'm asking? It feels a little weird to just ignore that part of the narrative.
Gonna be honest with you, my headphone cut out and I had to switch it.
Totally fine. It
So
wasn't
I missed the first
important
half of what
anyway. Probably wasn't important then.
Okay.
Do you guys want to move
Yeah,
on, or do you keep to some super chats here real quick?
It's probably a good time. Let me give me 1 minute or 30 seconds to wrap up Kipp's portion, and then we can actually move to conceptualizing this in the, more broadly. Okay. So yeah, I think we can all agree. We think Kipp was wrong on the hyperbole and harem comment. There is hyperbole with harem in the text. Yeah, I think that was wrong. I think he probably could have pointed out the ancient Near Eastern law that it's different and that they don't always have a black and white follow through on these kinds of things. It's an epistemic authority. Yeah, he does have some ground to stand on, I think, when it comes to non-combatants, and so we're gonna, I think about that some more in a second here. So we can move on from Kipp. A couple things wrong, a couple things right, I think, but that's how the internet works. So you do these response videos, right? So
yeah,
we can do super chats, and then let's try and conceptualize what's actually going on, I think, in these texts, and again, the broader narrative, like what is this, what's it doing? Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So Christian Theologic says, I've seen some people argue that Genesis 6:3 teaches that the patriarchal lifespans are literal. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, for his days shall be 120 years. Thoughts? Yeah, that's debated. For one thing, it wouldn't make sense in the way it's placed in the narrative, because people live over 120 years after God says that. Some have argued it could be a countdown to the flood, or a symbolic number, 10 times 12 kind of thing. So no, I don't.
Generations.
3, yeah.
Just 3 generations. Yeah, 4, 8, 12.
4, yeah. So I mean, like, yeah, I doubt that it's meant to be literal, given where it is in the narrative. So I don't think that necessarily works, because it wouldn't really fit with the way the narrative structure lines up. If he would have said it like, around the time of Moses, you maybe could make that case, but I don't think it works for where it is in Genesis. Is there a lot of evidence for ancient Near Eastern Canaanite child sacrifice? No, there was a scholar talking about this recently. Who was that guy we were going back and forth with a couple months ago, Joel?
Durrell?
Yeah, he said in one of those streams that infants rarely they wouldn't last that long, the body of an infant, especially when there was sacrifice. He said in one of those streams that they just don't last for a long period of time. So he wouldn't expect to find a lot from what he said on that.
Yeah, I don't. There are like sites around like the area, like in the ancient Near East, where there are deposits of what look like what are child sacrifices. I'm trying to think. Like, it is attested, so there is plenty of evidence, and like from written sources, like this kind of thing. Like it's not like, I don't know what this person's, why they're asking this. There is definitely child sacrifice going on, and even the Hebrew Bible itself is not tacitly, it's admitting that there is child sacrifice by fact saying don't do it.
Yeah.
Right. It wouldn't say don't do it if it wasn't a problem.
If you want more, Richard Hess in his book Israelite Religions does cite some evidence child sacrifice in that time period. I think a lot of it is from the Iron Age though, but he does cite some in like Amman, for example, as well as some other places. So check that out if you want more on that. He does cite some evidence for it. Thoughts on the claim that things like the Crusades influence Islamic jihad, and that Islamic extremism is modern and a result of Christian violence? That's just silly. I am actually okay. That's kind of weird to just blame it all on Christianity, given that Muhammad participated in 27 raids in his lifetime, and like, read Surah 9. Like, it's very much like fight the Christians and the Jews, because they say Ezra is the son of God, and the Christians say that Jesus is the son of God. So fight them until they willingly submit and pay the jizya. There's that. There's also Surah 47 as well. That's absurd. That Robert Hoyland, for example, his book In God's Path does not make that argument, as well as Tom Holland's book The Shadow of the Sword. That's just, so it exists before the Crusades, for sure. There's a lot. I mean, that's Hoyland's point, is that it starts out of this coalition of Arabs, various different religious backgrounds, and their whole point is to just sort of be like the Mongols. We're just raiding and taking over. And then later they go, well, we're going to start re-identifying ourselves around this religious idea. But early on, it was a coalition of Jews, Arabs, Muslims, this kind of thing. Than puppy checking in with a bark. I'm so annoyed with you. Moving on. What do each of you think of Heiser's view of the Nephilim bloodlines? I reject it. I don't think it's accurate at all.
It seems like a stretch to me. So that's it.
Yeah. I take Miller's.
Remind me what the Nephilim bloodlines. What do you?
The Canaanite conquest was about wiping out Nephilim bloodlines.
Yeah, from the flood.
Yeah, I don't know. No, I don't think the Nephilim were like half human creatures anyway. So I take Millard's view on this, as well as Meredith Klein.
I take Heiser's reading about the Nephilim in the Hebrew Bible, but I think that bringing this up when it comes to the war text in general, I really struggle with finding how this resolves any tension at the end of the day, even if you grant it. So I just kind of put my hands up and say, no matter what, I think we have to find other avenues to try to explain things, because lives are still being lost.
I'm not sure what this is because there's no vowel points, and I'm really bad with Hebrew anyway. So thoughts on John Walton's work with? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the harem one.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that?
But it doesn't. It's the wrong mem. The mem should be a final mem.
Okay.
Sorry, I was critiquing this person's Hebrew.
Listen,
Dude,
I was
I
confused
didn't even
also.
catch that because my Hebrew is so shoddy off the fly.
John Walton is removed from human use. I'm actually going to cite him in a few minutes. I think the idea. I think he's getting at the idea, like it's being devoted completely to God's space, and I think that's right in general. But I think he also seems to like try to get away from a lot of like prescriptive elements of the Old Testament and tries to like really like narrative it away in a way. When I read him, and I find it a bit. It's almost like he explains so much that it doesn't mean anything. But that's just kind of my overall take.
Tovia Singer did a stream with the Dawa boys on if Christianity is biblical and it's gaining a lot of traction. Can you react sometime? Yeah, we'll try to take a look. I have a Jewish friend who wants to debate Tovia Singer as well, so I would like to set that up at some point. For those interested on this topic, I am going to be doing a debate on which is better for humanity, Christianity or Islam. And I have found so many studies, guys, that are just so Islamophobic by stating facts. But yeah, I'll get to that. Hopefully that debate's about a month away or so. So keep an eye out for that. But we'll take a look at that stream, see if we can do anything on it. I've not seen it. All right. When you're ready, Joel, we'll jump back to you.
Yeah. Now it's fun. Now we're past Kipp. Love you, Kipp. But you're not fun. You're not the fun part of this. Now we get to the fun stuff, because I think this is actually like, I think we can put some meat on this for like how is this being conceptualized? And we're gonna do a little bit of whirlwind right now. Okay, so we'll throw up my slides.
There you go.
All right. So the Old Testament has in my opinion, a larger conceptual framework for the idea of harem. Harem involves, as we've already said, devoting things to Yahweh and to his sacred space, right? We all agree. We saw that in the dictionary, the lexicon. Space where he dwells. Stuff that dwells in Yahweh's space has to conform to certain parameters, like be wholly his, or it's going to face consequences. Devote it completely, right? So this is from one of my other videos here. So in order, my argument, and what other people have noted as well, is in order to understand this idea, I think we actually need to go to the first pages of the Bible. So what is the Garden of Eden? What it's I'm not going to go explain it right now. It's sacred space. It's a temple. Michael, you've got videos on this. Many Old Testament scholars share this perspective. I'm not saying that it's agreed necessarily across the board, but a lot of people, and I'm just utterly convinced by it. So in this perspective, Yahweh puts humanity in sacred space. He then says they have to follow one parameter. Do not choose right and wrong for yourselves. And what do? They choose right and wrong for themselves, right? They eat from the tree of the knowing good and evil. And what do they get for that? Well, for the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. So I recommend checking out my channel for my video on this particular verse. But putting that aside, Adam and Eve in this temple, they face, for disobeying God in his sacred space, they face the consequence of harem. They're totally destroyed. That's the threat. You're going to be destroyed. You're in sacred space, and you're not following the rules of the place where God dwells. This is God's place. He's here. So you have two options. One, you're going to die if you stand there and give God the middle finger, so to speak. Or you could be exiled out of sacred space, which is what God does for Adam and Eve. They're pushed away from the source of life itself. And in the Hebrew Bible, I say this in the video as well, that exile is also conceptualized as death, because exile from sacred space is moving away from capital L life. Like God is life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll spoil something. Later on, Israel's own exile is called herem. Like exile and herem are connected concepts here. It's a sacred space concept. So God exiles flagrant sinners from his sacred space, or they die in the face of his presence. And this is kind of like the Holy of Holies, right? Like you stand there and you say, I'm going to do things my way. And what happens? You're zapped like a bug, right? Like it's over. So that's like the rules of sacred space. You follow God's rules in God's space where his presence is, or you get out, get away. Those are your options. So this is like how the Bible sets things up at the start. God has a space. He has a sacred space. You either follow the rules of the space or get out, or you're going to get zapped. That's essentially how it sets it up. And we actually, so this is right from the get-go. And the same thing happens with the flood. The flood, the tabernacle is actually shaped exactly like the ark, and the ark like the tabernacle. They're representing each other. It's a temple. It's a boat temple, so to speak. I don't know if you guys know the other ancient creation myths as well, but they're also shaped like temples.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is a portable temple. What's that?
Oh yeah, Meredith Klein actually makes the case, and I think in one of his books, cited in my Genesis 1 to 11 series, that it's really functioning as a temple, and as where creation has to pass through is part of the covenant. Yeah. So, but it's just the same thing, right? You've got a sacred space, just like the garden was a sacred space, and Eden was a sacred space, and now we've got another one with the flood, with the ark being a sacred space, and so what we get then in Genesis 6 is the flood is a judgment on flagrantly sinning humanity, unrepentant humanity, and that judgment is depicted as God pushing humanity outside of sacred space into chaos and destruction. All of humanity gets exiled, right, and destroyed in an act of complete destruction. They're haremed in a sense. It's analogous to what happens with the harem destruction of the Canaanites. They too are pushed from God's space. He's making a space, or they're destroyed, exiled or destroyed, or actually joining Israel like Rahab, right? Mm-hmm.
So a good author who actually notes the parallels between the flood and the Canaanites and some of the Exodus stuff is Hawk in his book, Violence of the Biblical God. Either you guys read that one?
Yep.
I have not.
You have? Yeah. I really liked that book, especially at the end when he's talking about like Jesus's like the kingdom being outside of the systems of this world now. The kingdom gets switched from outside of the worldly systems, and so that kind of helps explain some of what's going on in the violence. I really liked that point. Okay, so you're wondering again, why does this matter about Canaan and the Canaanites? Well, it matters because, again, that the land of Israel, the same thing is happening. So the land of Israel is depicted as a holy land, a land where Yahweh dwells. It is sacred space, again. Mm-hmm. So I've given you a picture from Michael Morales there, just kind of showing an ancient Near Eastern view of the cosmos. But basically, the idea is that many scholars today agree that the temple was actually a representation of the cosmos, and that this wasn't different for Israel. So Israel just so happened to occupy then the privileged space where God's presence resides, right? You see this all throughout Leviticus, that this is my land. This is where I am. This is Yahweh's land. Yahweh lives here. So he's got a sacred space that he's set up. Again, just like the garden was a sacred space, just like the ark is a sacred space, and he's pushing people out, or people are being threatened with death. So if you're a Canaanite, or even if you're an Israelite in God's sacred space, the land of Israel, and like you say, screw you, God, you can't dwell here. I'm not moving, and I will actively fight against you. Well, in the words of Genesis 2:17, you're going to surely die. Like God's space is holy space. You don't get to tell God what his space is like. And again, I'm using this term sacred space kind of loosely. It's used more precisely in academia.
And one thing I want to add is, if we're doing internal critique of what the text says, I mean, Rahab says like that we've all heard of what God has done. And so there's like this aspect of warning, like they're coming, they've come in with miracles. They're coming with this powerful deity. So like there is that aspect of warning in the text.
Yeah, and I'm going to get to Rahab in a second, because there's different options here for what could happen. But Rahab is a perfect example of the text saying it's not as though this was inevitable. Like if people in the story, right, you could just be like, no, I'm on board with this guy who's setting people free from Egypt and the oppressors. Sounds good, and then you're fine, right? We'll get to that more in a second here. So basically, what I'm getting at is that the Canaanites might be exiled from sacred space, just like Adam and Eve. And like Israel later, who are haremed, they're Babylonian exiled, right? This is how the book of Exodus and Leviticus envision the expulsion of the Canaanites. They're pushed out of the land, not wiped out. Arguably, and that's a huge arguably, the Pentateuch could present this as the ideal way in these earlier books. I don't know if you could make that argument really strongly. It's only when Canaan stands up to directly confront what God's doing, that's when they face death. Like Adam and Eve were threatened in the garden, right? Israel becomes God's arm in judgment, and they're like the flood. I think that's how they're being depicted. They're the force coming on the Canaanites, like the flood. So in other words, like Israel's filling like a flood slot. They come, they are like a flood. They are wiping things out indiscriminately to the hostile Canaanites. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's all the same conceptual realm of sacred space, right? God is dwelling somewhere. What do you do when God dwells there? It's his prerogative to set the rules for that space. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
I love this.
I think. Pardon me?
I love this part of the discussion in general, because I just think it fits really neatly with like the meta narrative of the Hebrew Bible in general.
Yes.
I think it's super important.
Yeah. Once you see this stuff, it's like you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Like, this is the theme. This is the what's going on with where the Pentateuch starts, where it goes to Leviticus with the tabernacle, and then with Israel's own exile being like a recapitulation of what's going on there. And like, it's all over the place. Okay. Another option for what could happen to the Canaanites is what we see, what you just said, Michael, in the book of Joshua. Before a sword, this is really important. Before a sword is ever raised, Rahab says, hey, I'm giving my loyalty to God. I agree with what he's doing to these oppressive powers that exist in our world. And Canaan is actually presented as another Pharaoh and Egypt. So the same language of hardening of the hearts is there in Joshua 11:20. Many of these cities, Lynch points this out, were Egyptian outposts. I think you had a video on this, didn't you, Michael? Like
on what?
Did you have a video with Falk about this, about Egyptian outposts? I don't remember.
Oh, we've talked about a lot of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
In any case, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no. Yeah. We've covered that extensively. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's also like a red cord placed at Rahab's door, just like the blood of the Passover. So like, there's all these themes.
Yeah.
Being
Are you alluding to
together.
the whole like continuation of the Exodus motif?
Yes. Yeah. So it's being presented as a continuation of the Exodus, and so basically it's Rahab saying like, "Hey, I'm on board with coming out of Egypt, so to speak, and the oppressors. I don't want to be on their side, so to speak." So what happens to Rahab then, before a sword is ever raised, anything ever happens, is she's welcomed in, right? You can come into my space, you can come into my land. God says, go for it. So people like Rahab then are not in like the meta narrative. They're not choosing right and wrong for themselves. They're walking back into, so to speak, into Eden, right? They're entering into God's sacred space under his parameters. I also think it's probable, and this is like really important, that the fronting of the story of Rahab as someone who avoided judgment, that's supposed to inform the truncated stories of later battles. So anyone who is on board with Yahweh, even in a hostile city, Rahab's in a hostile city, right? And she says, no, I'm on board. Then she's totally spared, right? So she wouldn't face any threat. I think that's setting us up for the narrative to come. Like, that's totally a possibility with what's going on in these other stories, but it's never spoken, right? It gives you the example to start, and then you move forward under the assumption of what's been spoken already, right? So again, that Rahab is even spared in a hostile city is again contradicting Deuteronomy 20. But she doesn't get haremed. So that's important that the first example is a breaking of the law in Deuteronomy 20. All right, what else can we say about this? So I think I would just reiterate that Rahab is a case in point that these laws did not function as black and white, because the text itself breaks its own law with Rahab. So I think that's important to point out. I'm just going to skip over. I just brought this up again for the same point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so let's go back to Rahab for a second here. Yeah, okay, good. So basically, Rahab would pledge her allegiance to Yahweh, which is kind of like this idea of like devotion, right? Total devotion to Yahweh. And so then she would destroy the religious idols, the systems, whatever that made that Yahweh hated. So, and that's a point I think we haven't even touched on yet. That what's the rationale for harem in Deuteronomy and elsewhere? Like it doesn't. I think you guys would agree. It doesn't say kill them because they're a different race, or anything like that, right? No, it's what the Canaanites make you do, and so I have the text here, right? It's not what the Canaanites make you do. It's what the Canaanites make you do, and what their gods actually make you do. So we're dealing with a religious problem here. We're dealing with a action problem. What these gods make people do is actually the issue at heart, not like an ethnicity in that sense, or just a race or something like that. That's pretty consistent throughout Joshua, that it's about action. It's about the gods of Canaan, so to speak. So if essentially the gods are connected to the deeds of the Canaanites, these gods would need to be decisively removed from God's sacred space as someone was incorporated into Israel, which is what would happen with Rahab. Like, you're removing the gods. I think that we can emphasize that arguably all the harem commands for the Canaanites revolve around evil. The explicit rationale is divine judgment on evil. It's true for the Canaanites, and even in texts like 1 Samuel 15. You guys know that one?
Yeah.
Where Saul kills the Amalekites. The Amalekites are portrayed as constant oppressors, and the king is explicitly stated to be someone who bereaves women and is getting his just recompense. And that's 1 Samuel 15:33. So like it's constantly these commands are constantly or connected to the injustice of the peoples there. Of course, this is literature, so it's portraying people in a certain way, and I get that. But like the way that this text is trying to tell a story is that these are oppressors. They are people who are bereaving women. They are there's a problem, so to speak. It's not just indiscriminate in that way. So essentially, these three options end up happening in the text. You get exile, like Adam and Eve, like Israel later. There's death. If you fight against, like God is saying, I'm living here. You can hang out and chill with me, or you can go, or you're going to face a consequence. So those are basically your options for when it comes to sacred space. So what I'm basically saying is that God's presence in the land is the governing principle. It's the through line between Genesis 3 to the flood, to the conquest, to the exile, and to the New Testament, I would argue. This is all conceptually linked together. Now, it is debated in the literature, but scholars like Matt Lynch, who we talked about quite a bit here, he points out that it seems that the battles in the book of Joshua were all instigated by the Canaanites, not the Israelites.
Save for the battle
a really
of
profound point in his book. What's that then?
Right. He says that except for the Battle of Ai, I think he.
Yeah. Ai.
Does he say that? I don't remember.
Yeah, I can pull it up quick.
I have the.
It's easier to have the digital copy.
Yeah.
And Control F.
I got
I don't have the digital
here.
copy in front of me.
Yeah.
I can find it while you talk.
Well,
yeah, it's all good.
Let's just move on. Yeah.
Do I have the? Oh, you know what? I have in my notes here. You don't have the chart showing the Canaanites as instigators of battles. It's in Lynch, so I didn't make a slide out of it. So I should have. But
I can find it quick.
Yeah, it'd be good for you if you find that, because I don't remember that being in his charts, but I'm totally okay if it is. Yeah. So in other words, there's actually this is, in his opinion, it appears this is a matter of being attacked, not being not attacking in that way. So it's hostility. It's Joshua will talk about the hardening of the hearts, like Pharaoh. Like these are people, they're being hardened like that. Like there's this same idea of like doubling down into their evil and God handing them over to their evil.
Yeah.
There's a fringe kind of idea that I have about Deuteronomy 20. It's shared by some rabbis, and Second Temple literature. I think that the Canaanites were meant to be offered peace, according to Deuteronomy 20. It's only if a city decided to wage war against Israel that they would face Harem. So that's is a way you could read it, and rabbis did read the Deuteronomy 20 that way, which would actually correspond then to probably as well, that the implication would be that they attacked, like they were hostile.
Again, I've told you, when you're ready, I will pay you to help me write scripts on that kind of stuff. That sounds a very interesting topic. Yeah.
I mean, there's a verse in Joshua 11:19. It says, "There was not a city that made peace with Israel besides the Hivites and the Gibeonites."
Yeah.
So, like, one option for reading that is that peace was an option, right?
Yeah, like it's implied.
Yeah, it's implied the Canaanites could accept peace and enter into God's space, the sacred space, provided they devoted their land and practices to Yahweh and like cast aside their gods and stuff. Okay, let's try and move forward a little bit here. So basically, sacred space and harem are overlapping ideas in my mind and the mind of others. Actually, in Osta and Webb's book, Bloody, Brutal, Barbaric, they talk a bit about sacred space, and they do a really good job. I don't agree with a lot of what they say in that book, but this idea, I think they do a really good job on. That this is like an overarching theme of what's going on, why people are being exiled, death. Like it's all connected. This is interconnected in that way. And like I said, Israel's own exile gets called harem. Isaiah 43:28 says, "I gave Jacob to harem," and it's talking about the Babylonian exile. So it's the same thing, the same theme being recycled over and over. So even Israel gets booted from sacred space in an act of harem. So all of what I'm saying is this: God's space, like God's sacred space, he gets to call the shots according to the Old Testament. You don't stand in the Holy of Holies with your middle finger out again, so to speak, and expect nice treatment. And this is all connected. It's an interconnected theme. And so in that way, the Canaanites are facing essentially the flood. Israel gets put in the flood slot, and they're facing the same thing with the flood. They're facing the same thing as Adam and Eve. They're facing the same thing as Israel in God's space, where God gets to call the shots. What do you guys think?
No, I'm tracking with you pretty well at this point.
Yeah. By the way, I just put it in our little chat here.
I'm just seeing that there. Yeah, I'd have to take a look at it. In any case, the point still generally stands. That's fine.
Yeah, I think the point still stands with Deuteronomy 20. What you were trying to say, it could be implied, kind of like with I as well. But
well, the thing
another
topic.
topic. Yeah, I have to think more about it. I see there's a footnote. I have to check his footnote too. So I'm happy to be corrected on that. Okay, so I hear people saying, I hear the billions and zillions and gajillions of people shouting in the comments. I'm not reading the comments, but what about Jesus in the New Testament? He must reject all this violence, this divine violence. Yeah, I respect that. I personally don't see that in the New Testament. Okay, so what do I mean by that? And now I'm stepping on toes, and I know I am. So get your steel toe boots on. So I don't think Jesus disliked Deuteronomy or Joshua or Samuel or any of these books. He never gives a hint that he rejects any of these narratives, like including harem narratives. And I don't think Jesus rejects the law. I know there's a lot of Protestants who would be quick to dismiss this, right? Say that Jesus has a different view of the law. Jesus came to abolish the law or something like that, or like fulfill it, but fulfill it in a way where it's like not really the law anymore. But I don't think so. When I read the New Testament, I read scholars like Paul Sloan, Jason Staples, Matt Thiessen, where like Jesus is a Jew who agrees with the Torah. He accepted all the Torah. I don't know. Where do you guys stand on that?
No, I'm with you. I've read scholars like E.P. Sanders, N.T. Wright as well. Like, very much that these were Jews in the Jewish environment. That needs to be taken into account. Yeah,
and I think I'd probably go even further than Wright, but yeah. I think he's full on board with Torah. So that means Jesus read Deuteronomy and didn't reject it.
Yeah.
even if maybe he did think some of this, the things were, the concessions were commands, or sorry, the commands were concessions, right? That's possible. Like, it doesn't ever say that. He never say that he thought the harem commands were concessions or anything like that, but it's possible. I know he says that about marriage from Deuteronomy, or sorry, about divorce, sorry, from Deuteronomy. So maybe, tough to prove. But Jesus will also use the flood as an example, right? For judgment. And he doesn't seem to have a problem with God judging the world then and using that and ending life completely in that way. And even in the book of Acts, Acts draws on the same concept of harem in the story of Ananias and Sapphira. I don't know if you guys have ever heard this before, like the Septuagint. It actually Luke mimics the language of the Septuagint. And so when Ananias and Sapphira are compared to Achan, Achan who holds stuff back, so Ananias and Sapphira hold back money. And so the text is making a comparison between the two. And then they die. Like, God just kills them, right? He puts them to death for holding it back, which is actually mimicking Achan's sin. Than, your eyes are going wild.
No, I just never made that connection. That's pretty cool. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. So I think that there's a tacit approval of at least the concept that God can put people to death for judgment in this new sacred space, which is the church. That was just established, that the Spirit came and set up this new temple, so to speak, right? Yeah. Also in Acts 7, you see Stephen and the author of Acts speak neutrally or even positively about the Canaanite conquest. So it's not critiqued in the slightest. It just assumes it.
Yeah.
And they assume it to God. So it's like, you can't really jump to the New Testament and think that this just goes away, or that you can, I don't think so, that you can kind of read it away. I think it's still assumed. The Canaanite conquest is still assumed. They don't seem to, and this kind of judgment doesn't seem to be blocked out. Okay, but I think the most important example is actually from the book of Revelation. So this continues then. This one is when I came across this a long time ago. This one it's like, oh wow, that makes sense of so many things. Which is this. I don't know if you've ever considered this. So the measurements of the New Jerusalem are a cube, and which is the Holy of Holies. The only cube in the Old Testament is the Holy of Holies. So the New Jerusalem comes down as this Holy of Holies, this sacred space. And it measures exactly like the most holy place. And then I'm sure you can all see the through line now. Everything else is outside of the temple, in exile, in judgment, in the lake of fire. So all of unrepentant humanity gets exiled out of the sacred space into the lake of fire. So it's the exact same conceptual world as Genesis 2 and 3, as the flood, as the Canaanite conquest, as here in Revelation. It's the same imagery and it's the same conceptual domain. It's the same picture as the Canaanite conquest. And even Israel's own exiles, for that matter. Everyone is exiled from sacred space, whether that's the land of Israel or in Revelation, the sacred New Jerusalem. And there's lots of scholars who've taken this approach or taken approaches like this, looking at eschatological judgment. But I think, again, there's a conceptual through line that's going on here. So this idea of harem and the removal from God's sacred space is carried into the New Testament, as far as I can tell. So I don't think you can punt there necessarily. So I think the best thing we can do, and we'll actually, everybody, if anyone's wondering, this is a long stream. We're now in the final part, the last bit here, the last stretch. So give me 10 more minutes, and then we can keep talking or whatever. But it's a long stream, I realize.
Listen, you can go for another hour. We're fine.
Yeah, I could talk. I could talk about this for a long time. So
I find this stuff incredibly interesting, and the audience does as well. So have at it. Good. Yeah, because if you ask my students, there's one thing: I do not know when to shut up. I just keep going.
No, that's why you're here, not to shut up. Come on, keep going.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Yeah, I actually have in my notes here where I have a big bold thing saying, make sure we know how far we are into this. Is this too long?
Nope, you're good. You're good.
Okay, so I can just conceptualized harem, but I don't think I've actually solved the problem. And I'm saying I'm referring to me and a whole bunch of people who dialogue about this. There's so many perspectives on this. But I don't think I think we still have the problem of the Old Testament, and there's still stuff going on there that we haven't quite figured out. I'm only trying to point that there's a through line here, biblical theological through line in these texts that I don't think you can ignore. It's the same concept going across. Okay, so let's do something. Let's problematize. How can we problematize harem and the destruction of the Canaanites in a larger literary theological perspective? So there's a few questions we need to ask. So I'd say first question, and this is super important. Super important. If you've started to zone out, man, get back to it, because this is actually so important.
Yeah.
Remember that I said Old Testament narratives are teaching things across many chapters. This is where that kind of reading comes in. What happens when we look at the concept of harem as it develops in the Old Testament? How does this actually, like, what goes on? So if you just look it up, look at examples of it, of the noun or the verb. The first one is Exodus 22:19. I actually, in my book, I wrote a chapter on this law, not as much focused on harem, focused on the changes in the Septuagint. But anyways, it's an important law. Anyone who sacrifices to a foreign god and not to Yahweh will be haremed. That's what it says. Sacrifice to a foreign god, you die. The law is given. Tabernacle is built. What is the first thing that happens in the narrative afterwards? What happens when Moses is on the mountain? Someone tell me.
Oh, the golden calf incident.
Golden calf. What are they doing? They're freaking sacrificing to a foreign god. Now, that's one way to take the golden calf. There's multiple ways people understand it, but a lot of people take it that way. So they're sacrificing to a foreign god, which therefore means, according to the law that was just read to them on the mountain, they are facing harem.
Yeah.
But God does not harem them all.
Correct.
He doesn't. So there's actually mercy, like from the get-go, where harem is met with mercy, similar to Adam and Eve, right? Like they should die, but instead they're exiled. And you see that with Israel too. Now, of course, there is the violence that happens with Moses. Moses kills a bunch. He tells the Levites, and the Levites kill a bunch of people in that story. There's a lot of scholars who don't think that that's actually Yahweh commanding that. So even like critical scholars like Prop, he doesn't think that he suggests that might not be the case. Guys Moses, like Tim Mackey, Bible Project, he doesn't think it's the case. I don't think it's the case. I just read a dissertation the other day on characterization in narratives in the Old Testament, and they don't think they I don't remember if they said exactly for sure. I think they suggest that's not the case. So that I don't know if that violence is actually being commanded by Yahweh in that text. Michael, you've read my paper on this.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I have a paper in peer review on this that one day will come out of peer review.
Oh, God. We've been trying to get that published forever. Like we tried one route and then that backfired, and man,
it's sitting with a publisher right now. I kid you not. It's been with them for 3.5 months, and I emailed them and I said, "Hey, is it going to go? Like, what's going on here? Are you going to like send it to peer review? Do you want this? Do you not want this?" Sorry, we actually haven't even looked at any articles in a long time. We haven't even put our eyes on it yet.
That's frustrating.
Yeah, I'm just like, this article is cursed.
No, well, we'll get it published somehow. I'll
get it there. I've talked to enough scholars. They've been like, they think it's really, really fascinating and it needs to be published. So it'll get there eventually.
We'll just have to open up our IP publishing.
Yeah.
Okay. In any case, the first command of harem is not followed through with. I think that's really interesting, and it sets you up for like a mercy tempered harem, right?
Yeah.
Okay. There's another mention I won't go into it in Leviticus, where it just talks about setting things apart for the temple. We already talked about that being a meaning for harem. But this next one's actually really interesting, and again, I think this sets a stage narratively. Question, chat out there, you guys. Who commands that the Israelites should harem the Canaanites? Who makes that suggestion? I'm looking at chat for the first time.
Chat.
We're not Gen Z. We can't be saying this kind of stuff. Hey, chat. Yo, with chat. What's up?
Is
you
that
got
not
any
a thing?
reason
No,
there?
it's a millennial thing. I used to, dude, when I was a Twitch streamer back in the day, I would always say, "Hey, yo, chat."
Is that I'm so out of touch with everything. I don't even know. Like, is this a faux pas?
Whatever.
Okay, I see one guy who said, "I assumed God." We got Samuel. We got one person said Than.
It was Stan. Yes, that makes sense.
Okay, so I imagine most people would answer God, right? Yeah, assumed God. Yeah. Actually, what actually happens in the story? Seriously, check it out. This is the first time that the Israel and the Canaanites and Harem is connected.
Yep.
So the Canaanite king of Arad, who was dwelling in the Negev, heard that Israel came along the way of the Atharim. He fought against Israel. So again, look, an actual attack from the Canaanites. Same thing we see in Deuteronomy, arguably, and took some of them captive. So kidnap people. Israel made a vow to Yahweh, and they said, "If you will surely give this people into our hand, then we will harem them." And then it says Yahweh obeyed Israel. It's an interesting setup because this is actually the first harem text with Israel and the Canaanites in the Hebrew Bible. In this whole thing we call the Pentateuch. It's not God who says harem the Canaanites. Now, of course, I'm not saying that God doesn't, like, it's not a divine directive later on or anything like that. What I am saying is that Israel is the first one who asked for this.
Right.
I think that's actually important. They want to get involved in this divine judgment thing. They want to put the sword of God on, so to speak, and take some people out in a divine judgment. They asked for it.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and again, this is the Canaanites attacking them. They asked for it. Israel makes a vow and asks God if they can harem the Canaanites. And then God obeys them. So the first act is not God telling Israel they are agents of holy judgment, but Israel asks to be. They asked to be the ones doing harem against the hostile Canaanites. So were you saying something, Michael?
Yeah, and just I was just thinking about this the other day. You something kind of similar as you see with the Gibeonites. Like they go to the city to harem them, and they can't because they made a covenant, and the people start grumbling, like they're upset, like they want to do this kind of thing. So there's just a similar passage there.
That's a really good point. I need to consider that further. Oh, yeah. Oh, there might be some interplay going on there.
Yeah,
I'm actually gonna.
Oh,
I'm looking up after.
We should talk off stream then, Joel. There's a lot of
good.
really cool stuff.
I'm glad I just blew your mind. Makes me feel good.
No, I'm sure there's plenty of things like that, Michael. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, anyways, what I'm getting at here is that God does not thrust the sword into their hands. They say, okay, in this world set up by the narrator, in this thing we call the Pentateuch, Israel asks for the sword, and I think that's important thematically. Then you have to ask the question: how does that actually go? Right? I think this is set up a lot like the kingship narratives.
Yes.
Israel says, we want this thing. God says, fine, okay. How's that go? Do they follow protocol? Can they function as those who distribute holy flood-like judgment? How did it go with the king? How does it go with harem violence? Well, that's the question that you kind of have to answer as you go forward. Actually, the next story in Numbers, they grumble about not having enough stuff. So it makes you think that they haremed stuff and they didn't have it. And then they're like, oh, but I want stuff. So it actually does seem to tinge it in a negative way because that's the immediately following story. But in any case, fun fact, it might be that Nehemiah 9:24 actually reads this narrative that way. It says that God hands over the Canaanites into their hand so that they could do according to their own will, like Israel's own will. So it's like this. I'm not saying this is for sure the interpretation of Nehemiah 9:24, but I think it could be that he's saying that this whole harem thing was what their will from the start, and then how did it play out? It's a thought. I'm not going to go into more to it because I don't know if you can get solid ground on that necessarily. Okay, so what am I getting at here? I'm not saying, for one, that God was secretly against Israel being his agent of judgment in the story. So don't hear me saying that. I'm saying that the narrative depicts the call to participate in this judgment as Israel's own decision to start with. They ask for it, God obeys. You have to see how it plays out. They're the vehicle for the flood, so to speak. What happens? So Deuteronomy and Joshua are going to pick up on this, and they're going to amp it up to the next level. Israel's going to be put in like the God slot of flood judgment, and it's going to play out for, I don't know if you guys ever looked it up. It's like only about 20 cities. So it's actually not the biggest thing ever. I think that's interesting to note. It's not hundreds of cities. I think it's about 20, depending on how you group cities together. And then the question is, how does it actually play out? What happens in this brief period? And so this is really important. This is so important if you want to understand what these narratives are doing, I think. The text is highly critical of Israel in this role. What do I mean? There are rules for being the people who dispense God's judgment. If you are the agents of holy flood-like divine violence, you follow protocol. And what does that mean? The text tells you. says, you must not bring a detestable thing, idols, into your house, or you will become a harem. You will become a harem, an object devoted to destruction, like it. You must utterly detest it, and you must utterly abhor it, for it is harem. So right from the outset, this is Deuteronomy 7. It says, if you take stuff, if you take idols into your house, harem, you're delivering harem to the Canaanites, it's going to bend back right towards you. If you do that, it will come right back at you if you have idols. See how that works?
Yep.
Same thing in Deuteronomy 13, 20, and Joshua 6. We also hear in those cases, instead of idols, it's plunder, and animals should not be kept for the Israelites as a general rule in harem warfare. And that gets emphasized over and over. So 2 things so far. 1, idols. 2, taking stuff that's haremed. Number 3, if Deuteronomy 13 says that anyone who becomes like the Canaanites and follows their gods, those people become objects of harem as well. So 3 things that turn harem around back on you. Don't take idols, don't take their plunder in acts of harem, and don't be like the Canaanites, or harem's going to get brought back to you. So these are underlying principles set up in Deuteronomy. If you don't see them, you are actually going to miss the story. There's a few really important verses in Joshua in this regard. Basically, just the same idea of taking things. So you've got Israel sinning, transgressing the covenant that he commanded them. They take the harem, the devoted things, and then they couldn't stand before their enemies. They become a harem, and then God will be with them no more. And then keep away from the harem, lest you do harem and take from the harem. And notice you see the piling up of the language of harem. This is like the theme. This is the thing, right? And you set the camp of Israel for harem. Like, how many times do you have to say harem? Just like, this is what. By the way, we're talking about this concept. This is really important. And then you bring trouble on it. And there's a wordplay there with Achor, the Valley of Achor, which is what happens with Achan. He goes to they bring him to the Valley of Achor. And so it says you will Achor it. You will make the camp of Israel Achored, so to speak. So this is a really important text because it sets up the narrative. They take stuff, you face harem. And it also says God will push his presence away from them. You notice that. It says, where does it say it? I will be with you no more. So again, this idea of the presence is gone. This idea of sacred space and God's presence. He's evacuating. Okay, so they get warned from the get-go that they can become like Achan. They're going to Achor things. They're going to become like the Valley of Achor if they do this stuff. So how is the text highly critical of Israel? At the end of Joshua, what does Joshua say about Israel and idolatry? Do you guys know? Do you know the text, the famous one?
Did they have foreign gods among them, I believe.
Yeah. Hey, Joshua says, now remove the foreign gods that are in your midst. And incline your hearts to Yahweh, the God of Israel. So right away, in Joshua itself, they've broken a rule, right? Of harem. They have gods in their midst. They have idols in their midst. So by the end of Joshua, it says that they've taken idols. That means they ought to face harem. At the beginning of the book, they took stuff. They ought to face harem. Strike 1, strike 2, and you get to Judges, and it's strike 3. Israel took their Canaanites' daughters as wives for themselves, and they gave their daughters to their sons, and they served their gods. Those are the 3 things. Remember? I just went through them. All 3 by the time you get to the beginning of Judges, which means what? They are the distributors of harem judgment, and now it is turned back in, and they are facing harem judgment themselves because of breaking the rules of harem, so to speak. They became like Canaanites, and so now they're going to face the harem like Canaanites. So do you see what the text is doing? By the beginning of Judges, Israel is already facing divine judgment by failing to be God's agents of holy judgment. That's the answer the text leads you to. They become the objects of harem instead of being distributors of harem judgment. You aren't supposed to read the text and go, wow, they did it. They're look at them being God's divine agents of judgment. No, they completely blow it. The text leads you to the conclusion that they can't do it. Like they asked for, right? And so actually Trim here, I have a citation from Trim. that I thought was good, because at the end of Judges, he's just noting the same thing. When the Israelites become worse than the Canaanites at the end of the book of Judges, as illustrated in the comparison of the Israelite city Gibeah to Sodom and Gomorrah, compare Judges 19 with Genesis 19, then Haram is effectively brought against the tribe of Benjamin. So he's saying in part what I'm saying in whole, that Haram has just come back on them. And that's what Judges is saying as well. They've become Canaanites. They're effectively Canaanites. And so how could they be distributing judgment when they're facing it themselves? So that's what this narrative's getting at. But again, remember, this is Lord of the Rings style. You got to actually watch it unfold over the whole thing, not just cherry pick verses out of context, or cherry pick verses without considering the broader context, I should say. Deuteronomy 7, I could just briefly touch on that. It's an interesting text, because that one actually says that you're going to harem the nations, but then it immediately says, and Lynch points this out, not to marry them. So it's like there's an assumption that hareming the nations, somehow they're still alive, that you could intermarry with them. So I wanted to point that out as well, because that does seem to be, it's a text that problematizes this concept as well.
And it could also fit in with this aspect of hyperbole in the text in terms of harem, like you were talking about earlier. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, and I think there's an assumption that many of like the rural towns are not going to be attacked. We don't see rural towns being attacked. Like that's not the focus. The focus again is, I think, cities that fight against Israel. That's where these harem actions are happening, hostile forces, so to speak.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So perhaps then the term harem could be broadened in its meaning. This idea of removing pagan identity, or something like that, which Walton does as well.
Yeah.
It's possible. Anyways, it's a text that you do need to think about, because it's interesting. It's not so much about this narrative through line that I've just been going through, but I thought we should mention quickly Deuteronomy 7. Okay, and this point, actually, this is what cinched it for me when I was thinking about this, for how we know these texts are not prescriptive, and how you can be confident in that, and how you can be confident that the Old Testament, however they're getting there, doesn't see these texts as normative for even later Israel. And that's the next point, and I think my last point too. Okay, is Israel commanded to do harem later on in its history, and how do other Old Testament texts interpret the harem texts? This is really important as well. I don't think Israel is commanded to do harem later on.
Mm-hmm.
So in Joshua and Judges, you see the theocratic nation, it fails to be God's agent of judgment, and then harem turns back on them. They face the same judgment as the Canaanites. Well, then someone might say, what about Saul? He's the exact same thing. Yeah. So now you've got a theocracy, right? Or sorry, you've got a monarchy, and you've got God, and you've got this king doing the same thing. I'll be the agent of God's judgment. The very first thing he does is he takes animals and he doesn't follow through.
Correct.
So he faces harem himself as well. So it gets turned on him as well. So it's the text is problematizing this kind of violence, and arguably that he spares the king Agag, I think, the Amalekite king.
Yeah, he spares Agag and the best of the livestock.
Yeah, yeah, and in Usta and Webb, they have a good section on. Again, I don't like all their book, but one section on that he's trying to glorify himself.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's not about the way I typically phrase it. It's not about the fact that he showed mercy on somebody. It's like some people want to phrase this.
Right.
It's about who he left alive and why, and the reasons behind it are self-glorification in the ancient Near Eastern context that he's in. You want to parade around the king, and then the best of the livestock are ways to get more buy-in through the military leaders and all that stuff.
Yep, totally. And so again, he fails as well. So he becomes an object of harem. And so no one in this story from the theocratic nation or the monarchy can do this thing. It fails every time. Then you have to ask, what actually happens from here? Do you ever see a direct command from God that Israel or an Israelite king should go and harem somebody? And the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
The narratives don't use this term as a command for Israel again. They are suspiciously silent. Samuel doesn't tell David to harem. Elijah and Elisha don't bring up the commands as another prophetic word from God. It's over. So the nation fails to be an agent of God's flood-like judgment, and the king does, and no prophet asks Israel to do it again. You can even see in Kings itself. It talks about that there's the Canaanites whom the Israelites were not able to harem. Solomon conscripted them for forced labor. Assumption being, you don't have to kill them. Like there's no killing involved, right? They're assuming, this text assumes that that command is not active. Instead, they're conscripted labor. There's another example in 1 Kings 20. Just for the sake of time, I'll skip over it. Where I think it's using this term harem in a rhetorical way with Ben Hadad. I'm going to skip it just for the sake of time. I will. Yeah. In any case, there's another example as well in 1 Chronicles 4, which I think Simeon is depicted as like a super violent tribe because they're known in the Old Testament for violence. I don't know if you know that in the story of Dinah with the violence against like Shechem. The sister. In the
Levi's
poem,
involved too, which is interesting.
Yeah, Simeon and Levi. Yeah, and then later on in the poem, recounting that they're violent, and then they're violent in the golden calf story. Like they're known for violence, and so I think in this First Chronicles 4, it's also depicting them in this really violent tone when they take over a peaceable land with harem. Okay, so people might be saying, Joel, you're reading holes in these narratives like tea leaves. Maybe. But again, I'd like to point out what Lynch has pointed out in his book. We can actually see the commands in Deuteronomy in the book of Kings being followed through with, and they do everything except kill people.
Yep.
They follow through with Deuteronomy.
So
that's
glad
Josiah and Hezekiah in Kings and Chronicles, but they never say harem anybody. That is so interesting. So they're the first interpreters, or the earliest. There are earliest interpreters of these texts, and they're interpreting it in such a way that you do not go and harem the nations, kill the nations, so to speak. That is really important because they get this world of text far more than we do. They understand these texts and the rhetorical functions of these texts far more than we do. And they're seeing you should not be coming away with this with go kill people. That's not how they interpret it. They interpret it, destroy the idols. And then you could also go to the prophets as well. So, for example, if you go to Jeremiah loves Deuteronomy. We know that. That's well established in scholarship. But Jeremiah never says to Israel, and thus says the Lord, go and harem this nation, or go and harem this nation. Go and kill them. He never says that, even though he knows Deuteronomy. So again, just like we see with the historical narrative here, Jeremiah doesn't interpret Deuteronomy 7 as go and harem the nations, you Israelites. Same thing with Ezekiel. Ezekiel knows Deuteronomy very well. He prefers Leviticus, as Mike and I know. But even though he prefers Leviticus, like he knows Deuteronomy, and he never tells anyone, any Israelite, I should say, to go and harem anyone. So they're reading this, and they're not reading it in such a way that they think they should go and do these things. This is consistent. The Old Testament is interpreting the Old Testament for you in this way.
Right.
So then what happens to harem warfare? Well, arguably, and I'm not the only one to note this, it goes back into God's hands. So when you see harem language crop up, it's either other nations doing harem, like Assyria or Babylon or something, or God in his own judgment has said, I have actually now chosen to distribute judgment myself. So in this one, Yahweh's against all the goyim, the nations, right? But it's not you. You're not doing harem. But Yahweh put them under the ban, under harem. People of my harem for judgment for my day of vengeance. So God takes judgment into his own hands, kind of like the flood, right? He takes it back and says, this is mine to do now. And you see this in the prophets, that harem is something that is God's prerogative again. So these early narratives of whatever, these couple stories in Joshua, these early cities, they're never taken as a positive example. Like, now we should do this. Now that we should all be going and doing what Joshua did. It happened. There's these few texts, and then everywhere else, that killing aspect is just, it's gone. The Old Testament's not taking it that way. Yeah, and so you can actually see in here, and this is you can see that last line 10. That's taken directly and put into Revelation 14, in the final judgment scene. Night and day it shall not be quenched; its smoke goes up forever. This is like eschatological final day of the Lord kind of stuff. So yeah, God becomes the one who does harem. You see it in Isaiah 34, Malachi 4, in Daniel, with judgment being in God's hands in Daniel. And I think I could drive this point home, and we are basically done here, really strongly with one last thing on this point. What is the last line, the last word in the Protestant Bible? In the Hebrew text.
Oh, in the Hebrew, I was going to say amen in Revelation.
No. It's a Protestant Old Testament. Did I not say Old Testament?
Oh.
I meant to say Old Testament. Sorry.
Yeah.
The last line of the Old Testament in the Protestant Bible is in Malachi, and the word is cherem. It ends with cherem. But who's doing it? Who's threatening it? God's threatening it. God will wipe out the land if it doesn't, if the hearts of the fathers are not turned to the sons and the sons' hearts to the fathers, lest I come and strike the land with cherem. I'm taking this land out. If you guys can't get on board with that, and then you get Elijah coming in, right? The idea of Elijah to come, right, with John the Baptist, with Jesus, where you have these stories of the sons and fathers' hearts being coming together again. Like this, all this stuff starts coming in the New Testament, where that theme gets elaborated on. And echoed. But in any case, harem is the last word in the Old Testament. And God says it's up to him to do. So divine violence, like holy judgment, like the flood, gets brought back into God's hands, so to speak, as the Old Testament narrative moves on, leading to a book like Daniel, where there's like no participation in divine judgment. And arguably in Revelation too. People argue, and I agree, that Revelation does not depict humans engaging in violence, in judgment violence. It's God's prerogative. Okay, so what I'm saying to conclude is that the Old Testament interprets the harem commands and does not think that they apply to later generations as a command to kill Canaanites. It is possible that even from the original writing of Joshua and Deuteronomy, that these commands were not going to be understood to kill anyone in their present context. The narrative through line is that Israel cannot participate in that kind of judgment. They will fail and should not do it. So then that's the basic. You just had a lesson with Joel here. That's the basic lesson. I don't think I've kind of skirted around the hardest thing in these texts, which is that there's like this whole household judgment. That does get back to like, I think that's the hardest point still with all of this. I have a citation here, I think, from Trim.
Yeah, go on and finish up with the last page you have here.
Yeah. So it does get us back to the flood issue, right? Like, can God just indiscriminately say, you're done? Life is over. You've lost all privileges, all prerogatives. I'm sorry, it's over. If you agree with that, that flood can make sense. But again, there's this issue of people being involved in Canaanite judgment, or people being the ones being an instrument in this. I think part of what's going on here is that they do live in a corporate culture with corporate solidarity. So the Hebrews viewed life more interconnected, I think, than we do, and other cultures for that matter. Children were a continuity of one's own identity. Kids literally come from you, and their formation and who they will be, they're valuable in that they are going to continue your name, your identity, almost like eternal life, quote unquote, is like bound up in your kids and your name and the continuation, right? So they live in a corporate identity culture. They have corporate solidarity. And so I think that's the way that they envisioned life. The question is, of course, to what degree is that a right or a wrong thing? It's hard to judge another culture that has a different identity. We live in a individualistic society that's probably, I would argue, so individualistic that it's almost insane. We've lost sanity in that way. I'm not saying we should push towards an ancient Near Eastern corporate solidarity, but in any case, we should certainly question our own hyper individualism. But this is what Trim says. Another response involves the idea of corporate solidarity in which groups experience blessing and cursing together as a community rather than as distinct individuals. Many ancient cultures, as well as many cultures today, place more emphasis on community than on individual, because the Canaanite as a whole had rejected Yahweh and acted sinfully. Then the punishment comes upon them as a whole. Naturally, many people in the more individualistic Western world will not find such ideas satisfying. I think that's a fair thing for him to say. But I think that we see enough of this corporate kind of level judgment in the ancient Near East in other texts, not just the Bible, that The idea of judgment extending to a whole family unit is actually normal for their way that they conceive of identity and self and continuation. You have to ask the question, of course, is that right or wrong? Good or bad to have a corporate identity? To what degree? Yeah. That's the way I view it. I think it's a corporate solidarity that's going on with these texts, and I think they had not as much of an issue because they didn't build identity on the individual as much as we do. That's all I have. I don't want to do any more. We're at 2:20. That's a long ass stream.
If you're okay with it, I want to read a little bit of John Walton here in a minute. But,
yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, I'm just saying I'm not going to give any more content. I'll skip anything else I have.
Yeah. But real quick on the whole issue of corporate identity. Yeah, I would agree with you that we become too hyper individualistic. I'd say Christianity tries to find a good middle road. It encourages individualism in a way that the ancient cultures didn't allow. But I think a lot of liberals have taken it too far into hyper individualism, and we've lost a lot of the collectiveness that is also within the biblical worldview, including the New Testament that we have just sort of. So I think we're in this tension now where we're fighting against hyper individualism, and we're trying to push a little bit more collectivism, but at the same time, individualism did come out of the Christian worldview for a reason, but it just has been taken too far.
We still also do have examples of collective punishments in our modern Western world that, granted, it's not taking a life, but it's something as simple like in a paramilitary structure when I was a firefighter. If you're doing a training and somebody starts being lazy or isn't paying attention or whatever, like, hey, sorry, your whole battalion is now going to have to do some extra push-ups, kind of a thing.
Well,
like,
also, I mean, you can't get away from collective punishment even in our culture, because like if I were to go to prison, my family is going to suffer for me not being there to provide for them. We've tried to have safety nets to help with it, but it's still not going to be the same, regardless. So it's impossible to get away from that, I think, in any context.
I mean, you're dealing more with like natural consequences there, whereas these texts are dealing more with like divine judgment, right? It's not like it's a natural consequence. It's literally like a flood just hitting the house, and that's it, right? So it's a little bit different, I think, there. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. Let me put this up. So this is John Walton's book. He says, Harem does not mean destroy. It means remove from use. And then he goes into a lot more detail. He says Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, and so on does not refer to each and every person of those particular ethnicities individually. It refers to the community in which they participate and from which they draw their identity. So what does it mean to harem an identity? If harem means remove from use, then removing an identity from use depends on what identity is used for. We suggest that the action is comparable to what we might try to accomplish by disbanding an organization. Doing so does not typically entail disposing all of the members, but it means that nobody is able to say, I'm a member of X anymore. After World War II, when the Allies destroyed the Third Reich, they did not kill every individual German soldier or citizen. They killed the leaders specifically and deliberately, compared to the litany of kings put to the sword in Joshua 10-13, and also burned the flags, toppled the monuments, dismantled the government in chain of command, disarmed the military, occupied the cities, banned the symbols, vilified the ideology, persecuted any attempt to resurrect it. But most of all, the people were left alone, and most of those who weren't casualties of war. This is what it means to harem an identity. The terror, they also say after this, the terror that goes before Israel's army is probably intended to encourage them to flee rather than fight, or at least run away earlier than they otherwise might. Nowhere in the conquest account does the army systematically hunt down fleeing refugees. Nowhere are urban cities trapped in protracted sieges, because the land is harem. Israel cannot make use of it for itself, but it belongs to the Lord, and so the Lord can do whatever he wants with it. So similar ideas you were sort of going on to. I don't know how much, if you entirely agree with that or just parts of it, but it was more focused on what the aspect of harem means. And I think that this was when you were talking about the way the kings in the Old Testament later interpreted the command. This made me think of this more. And also with the quote from, I think, Lynch about going after more so the supplies or the aspects of the cities. What are they doing? They're destroying these identities in Canaan that serve these diabolical gods that committed child sacrifice. That's the aim of what the harem is supposed to be, is what I think they're arguing.
Yeah, especially if it's like those who are opposing, like actually actively fighting against Israel. It's like these are the pharaohs, so to speak, the pharaohs of Canaan, in the literary world established in these texts. So that does conceptualize it differently, I think.
Mm-hmm. Than, how do you answer the problem of evil? Now, before Than spends 3 hours on this, he has a video on his old channel, Exploring Reality, you can watch instead of him going for another 3 hours on this.
That's not, by the way, that video is not my theodicy. That is
okay.
So
well, he's coming
you can
out
look
with a
forward
book
to my
on
book
it.
on this. I'm not going to spend 3 hours on this. Or, by the way, what you could do as well is join our Patreon community or decide to support through the website. And if you become a supporter, you can get access to our Discord server and just talk to me. Otherwise, what you'll probably have to wait for is until my book gets published on the problem of evil.
Yeah, if you want to do that, the link is right below, ladies and gentlemen. You can sign up to donate right now. You gain access to that. All donations through the website, we get 100% of. Took a while to get that set up, but it's been helping us out a lot since it's much less fees in terms of like through Patreon or something. So consider donating and you'll get access to Than. I don't know why you'd want that, but there he is. Dr. Joel, misspelled. Have you read Dozeman's 1 to 12 commentary?
On Joshua?
I think so.
I mean, I probably referenced it. There's so much out there. I've read a lot of Dozeman stuff.
And suddenly there was an angel of multitude of Than's puppy saying, bark, bark, the incorruptible Thangeal. This is getting weird, man.
Dude, Joel, for context, that just came out of nowhere. Mike just one day in the beginning of a stream was like, yeah, we need to get like a better opening. And the first thing that just flew out of my mouth was, bark with me if you're my puppies.
This is why I'm disappointed in him, too.
Wow. Yeah.
What do you guys say about modern armies like the IDF that use conquest, complete annihilation against the Palestinians who are being called Amalekites by Netanyahu to justify modern genocide? I will first say, if that is what is going on, that is completely and totally evil and wrong and should be rejected and called out. I'm not, having talked to AP Apostate Prophet more about this, I don't think that's what's going on. He's done a lot more on this, looking more at Israel. I think there's a lot of misinformation going around spread around this, though.
Yeah, I personally just do not have a working knowledge of geopolitics in general enough to have a public opinion on this. And so you'll probably never hear me say anything public on this.
No, yeah, I won't speak on it.
My theory is the Canaanites gods wiped out, had something to do with MAOAL gene, the warrior gene that made them consistently sociopathic. Well, if that's the case, that's not talked about in the text at all. So we can't say that. If we give these verses the worst interpretation academically, is morally even a defeater argument against the God or the God of the Bible? I think there was some grammatic.
Is morality even a defeater? Yeah, I get. It depends on what you think God is justified in doing or not, and what the boundary conditions of what he can and can't do are.
Yeah. And, Than and I have talked about this when it comes to the problem of evil. God has a right to move anyone he wants from one plane of existence to another. I mean, based on sins.
Laying my cards on the table, man, like I have my ideas of what God would and wouldn't do and what God would be justified and not be justified in doing. But also, here's the thing. If I just find out at the end of the day that a perfect God exists and he did something that goes against my moral intuitions and my moral reasoning, I guess, I'm wrong. Just objectively speaking. And so, yeah, it's kind of weird to think about that kind of stuff sometimes.
My wife with tears streaming down her face. Please, babe, the children need shoes. Me, the spiritual head of the family. Than must hear the puppies bark. Look what you did. Look what you did. How would you respond to atheists who ask why God didn't make everything in the Bible clear for everyone of all time, especially the more difficult passages that cause controversy? Yeah, I would.
Book.
I would answer the way Edward Grant sort of suggested in his book, The Foundations of Modern Science. It's some of the difficulties to certain doctrines like Trinity, incarnation, transubstantiation actually helped motivate people to study more. And that led to more study in terms of natural philosophy, which helped to foster science. So this idea that we have the God to make everything simple, maybe some complexity was needed for humans to want to study more and then motivate them to explore more, which led to a lot of development. So
Yeah.
Not to mention that, like, this isn't just a problem for the Bible. This is the problem of human knowledge in general.
In general.
Like, it's not just the Bible's. Like, every subject matter, whatever you get into, there's always greater and greater complexity, and you have to think harder, and it becomes things become unclear, and there are full field disciplines that get emerge from those unclarities. Like, this is not just the Bible. This is it's more of a problem of just epistemology. How do we know for certain anything? How do we know what's the right interpretation of anything? It's not just the Bible. But now that the fact that it exists for the Bible is participating with us as humans with this epistemological problem. And so you gotta punt it back to that and go, okay, well then why is that there in the first place? Why do we exist as humans in this kind of world and not a world where science textbooks get written in the sky and the Bible answers appear on your page when you get the wrong answer or say something wrong? Like, why? It's a bigger question.
Is the map tabernacle slide in the map tabernacle slide? Why would portions of the Mediterranean Sea be part of the court? This seems anachronistic to how the Hebrews viewed the land.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, it's not meant to be. Sorry, it's meant to be like it's just a general guide. I would not consider the waters to be part of the land or to be representative of. Yeah, so it would be like God, Israel, nations, sea. Out of that, and that's what I was trying to get at. If they were overlapping in inconsistent ways, I'm sorry, I put it together pretty quickly.
Yeah. Is it problematic that God has the Israelites carry out the harem? Could God have carried out the punishment without the Israelites incurring trauma?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the thing, right, that I kept going back to. Like, I feel very uncomfortable with people doing it. I mean, the narrative itself presents Israel as asking for it, so that's one thing to ask, one thing to consider. Like, okay, but at the same time, God could have said no, right? So that is a troubling element of the text for sure.
Yeah.
I appreciate that the lesson I think the text leads you to is people shouldn't do this. You can't do this. You're gonna get harem turned right back on yourself. You cannot be an agent of God's holy judgment.
Yeah. What are your views on the missing ending of Mark? My view is that there was originally a longer ending that was lost, and then a later scribe tried to fill in the details. There's a book called The Mutilation of Mark, which talks about this, written by Croy.
I'm not married. I'm not married to a particular view. I can say this, though. I think that the long ending of Mark is rooted in reliable tradition. And so even if it's not original to Mark himself, I think that we can take the long ending and extrapolate historical groundwork off of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not tied to any particular opinion there. I think there's good arguments both sides.
Adam said, I've never heard this tabernacle idea referring to Joshua. I'm enthralled. Is this your guys' theory? Book recommendations for this.
Usta and Webb talk about the sacred space stuff. Check that out. If you want to get more into that general concept, see Michael Morales. He's a good, I'm assuming you're probably a Christian or a religious person, the way you're talking. So if so, Michael Morales' book is a good kind of like half devotional, half scholarly, Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord? And it'll get into the idea, the concept of sacred space in Israel in a helpful way.
In the sacred space map, what about when the tabernacle was it in the Sinai Peninsula during the Exodus? Did the center move, or is that a temporary situation outside of the map's general template?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the tabernacle was on its way somewhere, right? It's a representation of the cosmos, but in the narrative world, it's only ever meant to get to Israel. So I don't know if they're thinking. I don't know. It's a good question. What about? Yeah, can you go back for a sec? Just one sec. I just want to make sure I'm getting it right. Yeah, Again, the map is more of just like a heuristic to show you the concept. I think you're probably overreading it in that way. The land that God dwells in is his land and his people's land. I guess you could say that that's portable. And I mean, the idea of the tabernacle, I think it's also dialoguing with the idea of exile, right? In that you can have God, like Ezekiel says, move from the temple in Jerusalem and out into anywhere, and God can be present with the Israelites. You don't need that location of the temple, so to speak. God can be present anywhere, but like the narrative is leading you to this is the conception of Israel and what God wants. The plan is to have this nation, the nation extending out and then to the sea. So yeah, it's a good question though. I have to think about that more. I'm really intrigued.
This is from earlier. Adam says, Than commanded the harem. I don't know. Can't answer in the chat when I'm showering after work. Well, we appreciate you listening to us in the shower. Wouldn't expect it, but we really appreciate it. Good to know.
That OnlyFans content.
OnlyFans content. Yes. Joel, is the longer story of Goliath a composite? What is your take? On
my take is that it is. Not same as Michael's take. My take is that the longer story in for the David and Goliath story is not attested in the Septuagint. I think the Septuagint preserves an earlier reading of that text, and so it actually gets rid of the problems in the text as well when you use the Septuagint as a base text.
Yeah, my whole thing is I think I could see how a scribe could want to remove those. I think the original is what's in the Masoretic, though. That tends to be my view.
Yeah, see the article by Tove on the Septuagint version. I find it quite compelling.
Randall Rouser, a Christian, say these are prescriptive. Says these are prescriptive.
I don't think he says that.
I don't think so either.
No, it's you should read his book if you think that's what he says. He would say that these are what does he call them? Providential error, like errors. Like God allows these into the text, but they're not actual prescriptions that God has given to people.
Dr. Creech claims, I think that's how you pronounce it, claims that some parts of Samuel 1:15 make a distinction between things devoted and to sacrifice when it comes to harem. What do you think?
So I have to look up Samuel 1:15. Is that first Samuel 1:15?
Yeah.
Do you mean to read it to you?
Not so, my lord. Hannah replied, "I'm a woman."
It says, but Hannah answered, no, my lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord.
The word harem is not in there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 2 Samuel 15. Then David called one of the young men and said, go execute him. And he struck him down so that he died.
Maybe maybe what he's meaning to say is 1 Samuel 15.
Maybe it's 1 Samuel 15. Yeah, that would make most sense from what this is supposed to be. I don't know. We don't know what this guy's claims is, so we'd have to think more about it if we check his work out, because I've not heard of this before.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Opinions on the corporate view of predestination.
Imagine who's this for? It's for me because I do Calvinism stuff.
Yeah, probably.
I think predestination, in my opinion, in the New Testament is something that happens when you get into Christ. So if you believe in Jesus, you are in Christ, and now those who are in Christ are predestined for a path. They're going towards glory, towards ultimate adoption, the resurrection of the body. Like that's what you. So you get into this thing called being in Jesus, and then you're now predestined. You're set on a path towards that. That's how I understand predestination.
Yep.
Hi, AP. I have a vid on Islamic sources affirming Paul, Peter, and John. If you need more resources for your upcoming video, love the work. Yeah, I have like 3 in there, but I'll check it out. 18 Ministries. I've got Tabari, Volume 4, Ibn Kathir, and Ibn Asak's Life of Muhammad, so the Sirah. All are saying Paul was a follower of Jesus. So it's like, why are Muslims always attacking Paul when their own sources like Tabari? Like Tabari is like one of the earliest commentators, and you also have it in the Sirah. So yeah, I don't know what they're trying to get at with trying to deny Paul. But yeah, I found a couple, but if there's more, I'll take a look at that. Yeah. Gonna have to watch this again over individualized society having negative effect readings of passages like Romans 9 and Ephesians 1. We appreciate you rewatching it for sure. Did God save the Hebrews for justice or ownership? I'm not sure what this is in reference to.
I don't think that you can attribute just one motivation to God choosing a particular people group for this, because the ultimate, like, I think fundamentally speaking, God chooses a nation based on a promise he makes to a particular person, because that nation is supposed to be the vehicle by which he brings about the redemption of reality. Now, why was it Israel specifically over Canaan or whatever? I don't know. Joel, do you have any opinions?
No, I mean I agree. Yeah, there's multiple reasons for the selecting and use the election to a task, which involves being Yahweh's people and being a just people. But yeah, that last part, I don't know why. No.
Ryan says, did Muhammad harem the men of Al-Zut? Okay. Do you want me to tell you what this passage is, Joel?
Can I eat my
I don't think I want to
know
know.
while you do this?
Okay, listen. I have been okay. I will tell you, and then I'm going to tell you how Muslims explain the passage. Okay.
All right.
You'll get both. Okay, so this is a sound chain of narration in a hadith. It says, okay, so Abdullah ibn Masud, one of Muhammad's companions, said, the messenger of Allah sent for me, and so we set out until I reached such and such a place, and he traced a line for me and told me, stay between the two edges of this. Don't go outside of it. If you go outside of it, it's over for you. Abdullah said, so I stayed there. Then the messenger of Allah went a stone's throw away or a little further. Then Abdullah mentioned a group of male members who looked like the Zut people. They didn't have any clothes on, and I didn't see their genitals, and they were tall and scrawny. Then Abdullah said they came and started to ride the messenger of Allah. And the prophet of Allah began to recite to them, and they started to move closer and lean around me and get in my way. And I became intensely terrified of them, so I sat down or something like that. And when the morning light broke, they began to go away. Then the messenger of Allah came back exhausted or in pain or practically in pain for how they had ridden him. He said, indeed, I am exhausted. Then the messenger of Allah put his head in my lap and went to sleep.
Okay.
So Muslims will say that yarkabun, the word for ride, is slang terminology for crowding, and it's not people. They just look like the Zut. This is the night of the jinn, and the jinn are crowding him, aka riding, as he's reciting the Quran to them. Now, I've also been told from native Arab speakers like Ish of Arabia, Giant DOC, that's nonsense. That's not what that means. It means to ride, like as you would. Yeah, this is why this has been a really strange thing. And of course, now all of our followers just constantly keep bringing it up because it's so silly.
I don't know. It sounds insane in some ways. I'm gonna reserve my comments, especially because I'm just gonna reserve my comments. I'll go look it up.
Yeah, again, Muslims will say this is the night of the jinn. Apparently, and then Arab speakers have told me that that's nonsense. I don't know. I don't speak Arabic. I just find it hilarious, and it just keeps getting brought up. So that's where we're at now.
I mean, for in these kinds of situations, I don't know this well enough, but I hope that I could, like, as people read the Old Testament, they're like, that seems crazy. And then we have an explanation like, well, actually that makes sense for whatever literary, like, I don't know, whatever the explanation. I would hope that there's something on that side, but I don't know.
Of course, I've got no sympathy for Muhammad considering all the evil he did. But I mean, like, it seems kind of weird for this to be in the Muslim sources. Like, that's just the point we're trying to make. And so it's
I gotta look it up. Honestly, that sounds wild.
I've been told by people that are fluent in Arabic that yarkabun, that word means to ride. So that's where we're at. I don't know, but now you know why it keeps coming up in super chats.
It's from Rakav. Rakav is to ride in Hebrew. Yarkabum. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so there we go. There's another. Okay, it's like, all right. Yeah, I mean, like, listen, you study the life of Muhammad, you should feel no sympathy for him. Let's move on. If Matthew, okay, this is going to be preterism.
I had the same gut reaction.
If Matthew 16:28 is a transfiguration, where does the Son of Man come in a cloud with his angels to repay everyone? Verse 27. Why would he say some wouldn't taste death if it was a week later?
Already, but not yet.
Yeah.
This is a very vexing passage too. I mean, there's so many interpretations of it.
Well, I mean, it says some will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming with his kingdom and glory. So they didn't taste death until they saw the transfiguration. And again, Dale Allison says all three synoptic authors interpret this as referring to the transfiguration. And you're talking about Jesus, who uses at times cryptic language, rhetoric, hyperbole, all sorts of things. So I don't see why you're reading too much into this, trying to make it super, super literal. It seems absurd.
I recently heard Mike Bird talk about this New Testament scholar, and he said that he thinks that it's his minority position, but he thinks that it's referring to Jesus on the cross. That because in Mark, especially where this tradition comes from, Jesus rules from the cross, so to speak. His death is his glorification. He is the dying king, and so you'll still survive, all of you, until you see me die, and that is when the Son of Man is coming in glory. He's enthroned, as that's enthronement language, as you know from the Old Testament. Riding on the clouds, like that kind of thing. That's what he's saying here, right? Yeah, on the clouds. That's enthronement language. And so he's enthroned in his death.
Yeah. IP, do more streams, so I have something to watch while I play Minecraft. You got it. We will do more. We'll do one Monday. How about that?
Do Minecraft streams with you.
Okay. Weirdo. This is cool and all, but there's no common Hebrew, so keep coping, buckos. Got him.
They got us. Dang it.
Got us, yeah.
I thought they wouldn't notice.
I mean, the chapter, not the verses. Love you guys. Bye. Well, bye. I hope you meant, BYE and not calling us bi, because only Than is bi. So
I didn't even know this about myself. Joel, you're looking pretty cute.
For Than's Pop-Tart fun, thank you. Thank you. Have breakfast tomorrow night.
It's a protein bar.
That looks like a Pop-Tart. I'm going to go with Pop-Tart.
It's a Pop-Tart protein bar. They're actually delicious.
Sure. Alhamdulillah for the men of Al-Zut. See, I'm telling you, it just never ends, dude. It just... I mean, no sympathy for the caravan robber who had a child bride and 9 wives and sex slaves and all sorts of things. I mean, if he did that as well, I wouldn't be surprised. But again, it's never going to end. The Al-Zut will never go away. Dr. Korytko, how much of the Old Testament happened?
I'm going to do my best, Jordan Peterson. What do you mean by happened?
You sounded like you were in pain, like scared. What do you
He
mean
often
by
does.
happened?
Yeah, how much of it happened?
Yeah, I know I'm dodging, but again, that's a really broad question. I think my general position is that the Old Testament is literature, in that all writing about any event is selective. It's theologically driven in the Old Testament. It's ideologically driven in the ancient world. It's going to be. So things are going to, and they have different standards than we have. So you can change things. You can make a speech different. You can change stories up. Like, that's all par for the course in the ancient world. So when you say happened, well, what do you mean by happened? Like, it's just, it's hard to know.
I would say it all happened as long as we understand what it means in its literary context. So do I think Judges 5, like the stars fought for Israel? No. Maybe is it Judges 5 or 4? I forget. But anyway, I don't, do I think that? No. Do I think there was a real Moses? Yeah. Do I think there was a real conquest? Yeah. Do I think what you're talking about with telescoping some of those aspects in terms of the breadth of the conquest, like with Megiddo and all stuff? Yeah, I think that happened too, but I think you're right about the telescoping aspect there. So yeah, it happened as long as everything is understood in its literary context. All right. We can close this out now. Congratulations. We did it.
I did. I warned you a month ago, Michael. I said, if I do this topic, it's going to be long.
Oh, no, don't. We don't want that here. We never do anything long
Joel,
here.
Do you feel like we could probably have gone on for another few hours?
I was literally at one point just scrolling through notes and skipping. Skip.
Skipped all the good stuff.
With my notes, like the stuff you've covered, I think, yeah, this was like maybe 30-40% of all the stuff we could have done.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot more. Eventually, Than and I will do a pretty long video on this, but we'll incorporate a lot of this in it as well.
Yeah, Joel, I might actually have you work with me on trying to package some of the stuff that I want to do here.
I'd love to. Yeah. This is stuff I'm passionate about. So yeah, absolutely.
So Joel's channel is linked below. Everyone watching should go subscribe to him right now. He does a lot of really good stuff on his channel. He does things like this, but in much smaller, shorter segments. So a lot of good stuff. One thing, the first time I saw one of your stuff was like you were replying to Dan McCullen and me disputing. So I remember that. That was really good. So I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff on there. You got some other replies to Dan McClellan, so sure my followers will be happy to hear that. So yeah, you can check that out. Please subscribe to him below. Anything you want to promote before we close out?
What do I want to promote? Oh man, not really. Come study at Northwest College and Seminary, or I also work at Axe Seminary, which is in our building, which is becoming Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, TEDS. So TEDS is moving to our school. You probably heard that in the news about TEDS moving. That's it's coming literally down the hall from my office. So yeah, that, or check out my YouTube channel.
Broken wants to know if you're single.
Sorry.
Sorry. Sorry, boys. He's taken.
Yeah. And other than that, I mean, I'll be at SBL. I'll actually be at ETS this year too. If you're out there, I don't know if who goes to those kinds of things, but I'll be getting a paper on Tuesday morning at ETS, and then Tuesday morning at SBL the following week. So I have to stay in Boston for 8 days. It is ridiculous.
Don't worry, we'll be there. We'll be there. We can hang out with us.
We gotta hang out.
We'll feed
Dan and
you,
I have to have
worry.
a bench off. Let's have a bench off.
Oh man, how much do you bench right now?
I could do 225 for 10 maybe.
Okay, I'm a little weak right now. I'm
Yes.
like
Yeah,
225.
right now we're doing it.
I'm at like the weakest I've been in a really long time right now. I'm like 225 for 8, and that's rough for me right now.
I mean, on a bad
But
day,
I use a canted bar too, though. So
I don't even know what that is. What's a canted bar?
a cambered bar. I mean, so the barbell, instead of going straight, there's a divot in it, so I can get a deeper.
A deeper, yeah. Okay. Well, then it's
I
on.
just do push-ups. That's all. Much easier. Anyway, tomorrow we have a video coming out on a new Islamic dilemma. I have put together a short video presenting another Islamic dilemma that Muslims will have to deal with. That will once again show that Islam is false, because no matter which horn of the dilemma they take, Islam is false. So second Islamic dilemma coming out tomorrow on this channel. Please check that out. And then a little while, I'll have a video coming out called How Christianity Saved Children. We'll be going into the history of how children were used in the ancient world. We're relying on scholars like Owen Baki, for example, on how they were often turned into sex slaves, and Christians came along and got rid of that kind of stuff, invented orphanages, all sorts of good stuff. So yeah, that video will be coming out pretty soon. But yeah, check out the video coming out tomorrow, and we'll see you guys next time. We'll be live again Monday. So thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
You made it to the end of this video, which means this message matters to you. If you want to see more content like this reaching people for Christ, you can help make it happen. Your support makes these videos possible. Click the link below and donate today. And if you want to go even deeper, consider joining our Patreon community. You'll get early access to videos, behind-the-scenes content, and a place to connect with others passionate about this mission.